Part 1 of Game of Thrones, This Night Needs Money. Chapter 1, The Lion with a Broken Claw. Damn peasant. You dare secretly count the apples on Lord Finn's tree, clearly plotting to steal them. I'm innocent, my lord. Everyone knows I can't even count. Bullshit. Still talking back. 5 lashes as punishment. Crack, 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 crack. Ah, wait, my lord, that was the 6th. Ha, slippery bastard. And you still claim you can't count. The words fell, followed by another round of whipping. Only after beating him for a good while, until the man lost consciousness, did the farm overseer finally set down his whip, satisfied. Hang this wretch up. Let all those ungrateful peasants see what happens. Yes, sir. // Where the hell am I? In a haze, Armando slowly came to, his head and body racked with searing pain. The last thing he remembered was finally surviving 8 brutal years of combined undergraduate and postgraduate study, earning his medical license, and standing at the threshold of a brilliant future. Then, on his very first day seeing patients, a runaway 100-ton truck plowed straight into the clinic. Damn it. He shook his head, and a flood of memories that weren't his own surged into his mind. The Riverlands. Picking apples. Being paid copper coins. Visiting brothels. Shit. I've transmigrated into the cursed Middle Ages. Forcing open his swollen eyelids, Armando cursed inwardly and lifted his head, only to realize his hands were tightly bound and he was hanging high from an apple tree. With his training as a surgical resident, he could tell at once that his body bore dozens of injuries of varying severity. The pain made him suck in cold breaths again and again. He scanned his surroundings. Below him stood a sparse crowd of a dozen or so people, men and women alike, clad in patched, tattered clothes, all pointing and whispering. That wretched Armando. Lord Finn giving us work is already a blessing beyond measure, and he not only shows no gratitude, he even dares try to steal the Lord's apples. Exactly. If we anger the Lord and he docks our wages this month, we'll all starve. May the stranger take him away and appease Lord Finn's wrath. May the Mother show mercy and bless the apples in the Lord's lands with a bountiful harvest. That's right. It's because of vermin like Armando that the last batch of apples was so sour and bitter. The harvest was terrible, young Master Derek even grew thin. It broke my heart. Everyone, work hard. Let's raise the young master plump and fair, to repay Lord Finn's kindness. Ooh, ha. Amid the fervent cheers, the farmhands dispersed in high spirits and returned to their backbreaking labor. From start to finish, not a single person showed even a trace of sympathy for what Armando had suffered. Fuck, your mother. Their numb indifference chilled Armando to the bone. But in his weakened state, he couldn't even curse properly, he could only gape, gasping hoarsely, HH. Ignorant fools. By the 7, the original owner of this body had absolutely no intention of stealing anything, he'd merely been standing under the tree, counting for fun. And that so-called Lord Finn was no benevolent master at all, but a miser beyond compare. A strong laborer like Armando earned only 91 copper coins for an entire month's work, less than 2 silver stags. And that was for more than 14 hours of labor every single day, without a single day off. Even in the fertile Riverlands, that meager pay barely bought him stale black bread and a small bowl of watery porridge each day. And yet, astonishingly, the original Armando would still scrimp every half year, sometimes even skipping meals, just to visit a brothel. Such iron will was truly rare. Kindness. To hell with that so-called kindness. Still, no matter how furious he felt, Armando knew perfectly well that trying to explain class struggle between landlords and peasants to these people, long crushed by exploitation, would be like playing the lute to a cow. So he simply adjusted his breathing, trying to recover a bit of strength, and began thinking seriously about how to survive in this absurdly feudal world. Just then, a translucent panel suddenly appeared before his eyes. Name, Armando. Profession, doctor. Skill, surgical operation LV.2. Available skill draws, 0. Notice, skill draws may be obtained through recharging. Rules as follows. LV.1 Apprentice 10 gold dragons per draw. LV.2 Veteran 100 gold dragons per draw. LV.3 Expert 1000 gold dragons per draw. LV.4 Master 10,000 gold dragons per draw. LV.5 Grandmaster 1 million gold dragons per draw. A cheat system. Armando's eyes lit up, only to dim again in the very next moment. Even the lowest, apprentice tier draw cost 10 gold dragons. Where the hell was a penniless farmhand like him supposed to find that kind of money? What did 10 gold dragons even mean? At a wage of 91 copper coins per month, even if he didn't eat or drink a single thing, he'd need to work for over 100 years just to afford one draw. And with each tier, the cost multiplied tenfold. From LV.4 to LV.5, it jumped a full 100 times, 1 million gold dragons. That was completely insane. It basically meant that even if Armando worked non-stop from the time humans were still monkeys all the way into the 21st century, he still wouldn't scrape together that much money. Isn't this just sentencing me to death? UF***** ing dog system, I. Ding tilde detecting first time system activation. A free, unrestricted draw has been granted. Ellipsis. Godfather. Bro admits his voice was a little loud just now. There were people outside. Bro'll kowtow to you right here. Begin the draw. Armando commanded silently. The system interface immediately began spinning at high speed, countless multicolored cards flashing and tumbling before his eyes. After a long, dizzying moment, a single card finally emerged. A jet black card, shimmering with iridescent colors. Skill, Fate's Wager unrestricted non-upgradable. A gold dragon that cannot be used as currency will always remain in your pocket. When an enemy initiates an attack against you, you may forcibly activate Fate's Wager. If the opponent chooses to continue the attack, you will completely negate the next instance of damage and gain the right to execute the enemy. Cooldown, 7 days. PS, I bet your gun is empty. \__. Just as Armando was absorbed in studying his cheat skill, a rapid thunder of hooves approached from afar. They made no effort to rein in their mounts, trampling straight through the fields and crushing countless stalks of wheat. Whoever they were, they clearly meant trouble. What are you staring at? Get back to work. The same overseer who had beaten Armando earlier barked angrily at the farmhands, then motioned to 2 subordinates and strode forward. Stop there, knights. This is the land of Esser Finn. Control your horses, you're ruining the crops. HRary. His shout seemed to have some effect. Once the riders crossed the fields, they reined in their mounts a short distance away. At their head was a tall, gaunt man with a goatee, a necklace of coins strung together hanging around his neck. His mount was particularly eye-catching, a black and white striped zebra. Hanging from the tree, Armando saw it clearly and couldn't help but feel astonished. Zebras were notoriously vicious creatures, virtually impossible to domesticate even in his previous life. Under everyone's gaze, the man nudged his mount forward, swaying lazily until he stopped before the overseer. His expression was casual, almost flippant, though one ear was wrapped in blood-stained bandages, lending him a slightly ridiculous look. Apologies. My men lack manners, he said lightly. We're just passing through and a bit thirsty. Thought we might ask for a few apples. He glanced around, then grinned. Esser Finn, was it? I've heard the name before. Who does he swear fealty to again? Lord Edmure Tully, my lord, the overseer replied. Hearing the calm tone, the overseer relaxed slightly, though not completely, and added cautiously, the apples aren't ripe yet. After all, the group numbered more than a dozen men, every one of them fierce-looking and ill-tempered. At his answer, the gaunt man's smile widened deliberately, and he raised his voice. Oh, then my memory hasn't failed me. We are knights sworn to Roose Bolton, acting under the command of His Grace Robb Stark, King in the North, here to escort the Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister, back to Riverrun. His voice carried far. Even Armando, hanging in the distance, heard every word. Clearly, his heart skipped. Roose Bolton, Robb Stark, Jaime Lannister. These names were far too familiar. Earlier, in the confusion of transmigration, he hadn't thought much about it, but now it was unmistakable. He had crossed over into the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. And if his guess was right, this was still the War of the Five Kings. Before Armando could fully process that realization, the gaunt man waved his hand, signaling several subordinates to move aside. They revealed a horse behind them, on whose back were two figures bound tightly together. One wore armor, broad-shouldered and imposing, with a rough, round face and blazing blue eyes filled with perpetual fury. Though battered, it was still clear. She was a woman. The other figure was gaunt and slumped, head hanging low in utter misery. Filthy, tangled hair framed his face, making him look exactly like a wounded male lion. And most importantly, around his neck hung a rope. And dangling from that rope was no jewel, no ornament, but a severed hand. Chapter 2, The Brave Companions. Jaime Lannister, Lord Tywin's eldest son, a knight of the Kingsguard. The Kingslayer, a notorious, sister collision specialist. In short, if that filthy, broken man really was Jaime Lannister with one hand severed, then the person bound to him could only be the beauty, Brienne of Tarth. As for the leader of this so-called knightly band, "My name is Walton, my lord." The man astride the zebra continued with an easy smile. "Anyone sworn to the king in the north knows me. I'm the captain of Lord Bolton's household guard. Greetings, Esser Walton." Hearing that the newcomers were aligned with his own lord, the farm overseer finally relaxed completely. After all, the Kingslayer's signature golden hair was far too recognizable, even caked in filth, there was no mistaking it. Still, he added cautiously, "Unfortunately, Esser, the apples aren't ripe yet. That said, we can provide food and water for you and your men. These days there have been shadow lynxes prowling nearby. Traveling at night may not be safe. You'd best move on as soon as possible." The overseer was an experienced man. Having managed estates for landed knights for over a decade, he believed he could handle these outsiders well enough. Northern savages marching south for war would certainly pluck every feather they could, but as allies, they shouldn't go too far. The war had already dragged on for over a year. Esser Finn himself had been summoned to Riverrun by Lord Edmure, and it was up to him to safeguard the estate. Sure enough, when he heard that food and water were available, Esser Walton broke into a satisfied grin. "Excellent. I told you all, Esser Finn is a generous man. We'll rest here tonight and set off again tomorrow." He turned and shouted to his men, drawing a chorus of whoops and jeers in response. The group excitedly headed toward the center of the farm, completely ignoring the overseer's steadily darkening expression. "Damnable thugs." The overseer cursed inwardly. He'd only meant to give them some hard bread and send them on their way. He never expected them to seize the opportunity and decide to spend the night indoors. He wanted to stop them, but there were more than a dozen fully armed men, while he had only 2 guards at his side. Worse still, the farm was surrounded by orchards and lay at least 5 miles from Esser Finn's castle. There was no time to call for help. He could only watch helplessly as they filed in. "Go, escort young Lord Derek back to the castle. Quietly. Don't let those northern bastards notice. Damn it, I never should have agreed to bring him to the farm today." Gritting his teeth, the overseer turned his head slightly and whispered the order to one of the guards. The guard nodded and turned toward a nearby wooden cottage. But just as the group passed the overseer and his 2 men, Armando, hanging high above, noticed something. At the front of the column, Walton suddenly raised his fist and made a sharp hand signal. "No, he isn't Steelshanks Walton." Armando desperately searched his memory of the story he once knew, his eyes widening in shock. That man was. Before he could finish the thought, the raised hand dropped. In the next instant, the orderly marching line exploded into violence. Weapons were drawn without warning, blades flashing as they struck down the overseer and the guards beside him. It happened so fast that the irritation hadn't even faded from the overseer's face before his throat was slit. He and his guards collapsed to the ground together, lifeless. At the same time, the group scattered with terrifying coordination. The guard who had just run ahead heard the commotion and turned his head. Only for a spiked mace to smash his skull to pieces. The others spurred their horses straight into the orchard, ruthlessly hunting down every farmhand still at work. "What do you think you're doing, Vargo Hote?" Brienne's furious shout rang out at once. Her sense of justice simply couldn't accept that these men could be this utterly depraved. "He already agreed to give you food and water. You all swear fealty to the king in the north, why are you slaughtering innocent people like This. Shut up, whore. Her answer was a merciless punch straight to the face. She fell from her horse, crashing to the ground. Her already filthy armor was smeared with fresh mud, and the bound Jaime tumbled down with her. The man who had called himself Walton, now exposed as Vargo Hoat, leapt down as well, lifting his boot and kicking the two of them over and over again, curses spilling non-stop from his mouth. Damn bitch. If your father doesn't pile sapphires as high as a mountain for your ransom, I'll have every soldier in Harrenhal line up and have their turn with you. After several savage kicks, he finally stopped. He swung back into the saddle, his horse's hooves trampling the overseer's corpse as he rode toward the orchard, bursting into wild laughter. I'm the Lord of Harrenhal now. And if a lord says he wants apples, then today I will eat those damn apples. //. Hanging from the tree, Armando watched as shouts and screams echoed endlessly through the orchard. His heart sank into sheer panic. Just as in the story he remembered, that man was never Roose Bolton's guard captain. He was the infamous leader of the brave companions, Vargo Hoat. And every one of his men was a vicious, bloodthirsty bandit. At the start of the War of the Five Kings, Hoat had first been taken in by Lord Tywin Lannister. Later, he betrayed his employer and swore allegiance to King Robb Stark, surrendering Harrenhal in exchange for a title, thus becoming its lord. But as the saying goes, a dog never stops eating shit. Even with a title and lands, he was still a bandit to the bone. It was over. Once these people set their sights on the farm, no one would be left alive, including him. That system skill might be powerful, but it could only be used once every 7 days, and there were more than a dozen of them. As Armando desperately searched for a way out, Vargo Hoat plucked an apple from a tree, and finally noticed him. Mounted on his zebra, Hoat rode straight toward him. Damn it! Armando struggled frantically, but the ropes binding his wrists were far too tight. He could only watch helplessly as Hoat stopped beneath him. Well, what have we got here? Hoat craned his neck up, staring at Armando as if he'd found a particularly amusing toy. A roast suckling pig. 2 members of the brave companions rode over as well, circling Armando slowly, eyeing him with interest. Looks like someone who got himself punished, one of them chuckled. Skin's not bad either, just a bit old. If he were younger, I bet that would be very interested. The other laughed. Forget it. That freak only likes little ones. Anyone over 12 doesn't even catch his eye. Heard he picked up the habit back when he was a septon. The first man nodded and casually drew a dagger from his saddle. Looks useless. Let's just kill him. He moved in without hesitation. Neither Vargo Hoat nor the others made any attempt to stop him. They'd intended to silence everyone from the very beginning. Armando's heart was pounding. Just as he was about to gamble everything, activate the skill and take one of them with him. Vargo Hoat tilted his head slightly, revealing the ear wrapped in blood-stained bandages. Armando's eyes lit up. Wait. I'm a physician, my lord. I can treat your ear. Hoat didn't even bother listening. To him, this was nothing more than a dying man's final struggle. When facing death, people would say any desperate lie, he'd seen it countless times. As the dagger drew closer, Armando abandoned all subtlety and shouted at the top of his lungs. Your ear has already started to fester. If it's not disinfected, you'll develop a high fever, and you'll be dead within 2 days. The dagger was nearly upon him. Just as Armando prepared to trigger his skill, a flash of white light burst before his eyes. Clang! The dagger fell to the ground. You'd better not be lying, boy. Vargo Hoat didn't sheath his sword. He rode closer, the razor-sharp tip pressing against Armando's stomach. Otherwise, I'll let that make an exception. Of course, my lord. Only then did Armando finally breathe out in relief. I swear by the 7, if I can't cure your ear, may I fall into the 7 hells. No need for oaths. Vargo Hoat slid his blade back into its scabbard, took a bite of the apple, and spoke through a mouthful of pulp. If you fail, I'll personally send you to hell. Ha ha ha. He chewed a few times, juice dripping down his beard, then his expression suddenly changed. Ha! He spat the mangled apple onto the ground. God damn it, it's not ripe after all. Chapter 3, My name is Odin. Armando had spoken too soon. The moment he tore away the bandages wrapped around Vargo Hoat's ear, the sight before him made his head buzz. It was absurd. Absurd to what extent? Put simply, his ear looked as if it had been torn clean off by some wild beast, then crudely slapped back into place, wrapped tightly in bandages like nothing had happened. Staring at the mangled remnant, now badly infected, oozing pus and turning black, Armando's stomach churned violently. Still, relying on years of professional training, he forced himself to assess the injury. The blood supply to the avulsed auricular cartilage had been almost completely cut off. Forcing it back into place had only turned it into a slab of necrotic tissue pressed against the wound, perfectly sealing off drainage and creating an airtight bacterial incubator. Classic post-traumatic tissue necrosis with severe infection. A textbook example of how not to treat an injury. The consequences were far worse than simply losing an ear. This was practically suicide. As much as Armando would have loved to see this brute die sooner rather than later, if Vargo Hoat actually dropped dead, he wouldn't be far behind. After all, those gleaming swords and knives were waving right in front of him. What are you staring at? Get on with it, boy. Seeing Armando hesitate, the gaunt man brandishing a short blade grew impatient and snapped irritably. From their earlier exchange, Armando knew his name, Urswick, the brave companion's deputy commander. My lord. Armando forced himself to calm down and explained steadily. The situation is extremely serious. The ear you pressed back into place is already necrotic. It must be removed immediately, along with all the rotting flesh. Otherwise, the infection will enter your bloodstream and cause a high fever. Whore. Before Armando could finish, Vargo suddenly turned and screamed at Brienne. You filthy bitch. You bit off my ear. I'll cut off yours and stuff it into that ugly cunt of yours. Hey. Faced with the threat, Brienne showed no fear at all. She sneered coldly. A fitting punishment for a man who tried to violate a maiden's chastity. Her mocking tone only enraged Vargo further. He sprang to his feet and began raining blows on her with fists and boots alike. Jamie, bound beside her, didn't move an inch, his head still lowered, his thoughts unreadable. Seeing this, Armando could more or less guess what had happened between Brienne and Vargo earlier, and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. The leader of the brave companions really was desperate. He'd try to eat anything when starving. Still, it looked like he hadn't succeeded. Otherwise, with Vargo's temperament, Brienne wouldn't still be wearing armor. No, more likely, she wouldn't be wearing anything at all. After venting for a while, Vargo's anger subsided somewhat. He turned back and planted himself squarely in front of Armando, staring him down with naked menace. You'd better know what you're doing, boy. Rest assured, my lord. I'm confident. Armando swore it with conviction, though inside, he had none. 8 years of combined undergraduate and postgraduate study, endless residency rotations, he'd assisted with debridements and suturing, sure. But handling an infection of this severity, combined with tissue adhesion, on his own, under conditions this primitive. Even his mentor would have broken into a cold sweat. I need hot water. Whether the treatment actually worked was secondary. The priority was bluffing his way through and staying alive. He turned without hesitation and barked orders at the brave companions. Boiling hot water. Clean cloths boiled in the water. Salt, honey, an oil lamp, and a sharp knife or dagger. Spider silk or clean moss would be even better. The sudden string of commands left several of them stunned. Yet just as some of the men were about to bristle, Vargo broke into a grin. Do as he says. The way this boy talks, it reminds me of Qyburn. About half an hour later. Inside the wooden hut, only the sounds of sizzle and crack, crack, echoed without pause. Armando was fully focused, gripping a blade heated red hot as he swiftly excised the rotting flesh from Vargo Hoat's ear. It was far from an ideal instrument, but it provided the bare minimum of sterilization and hemostasis. The knife sliced through adhered fibers while cauterizing and sealing blood vessels at the same time. His movements were careful and precise, making absolutely sure not to tear into the dense vascular network at the base of the ear, otherwise, massive bleeding would follow. And if anything went wrong during the operation, the 2 brave companions standing nearby would carve him into pieces without hesitation. Vargo Hoat lay completely motionless. Of course, this wasn't because he was some iron-willed tough man. From the moment the operation began, he'd been drinking non-stop to numb the pain, until he finally drank himself unconscious. A patient downing vast amounts of alcohol mid-surgery, if Armando's mentor ever saw this, he'd skin him alive. But in conditions like these, where even basic sterility was a luxury, no one had the right to demand better. Minute by minute, a large chunk of tissue, necrotic ear included, was finally removed in one piece, exposing relatively fresh tissue beneath. Armando didn't dare pause. He immediately flushed the wound again with hot saline, then smeared it with honey and bandaged it tightly. In an environment like this, high-proof distilled alcohol was impossible to obtain. He had no choice but to settle for second best. Fortunately, the farm had plenty of honey. Its high sugar content drew moisture out of bacteria, inhibiting their growth. Most pathogens couldn't survive under such conditions. Armando had tested this himself in his previous life. Once the bandaging was done, exhaustion hit him all at once. His legs gave out, and he slumped onto the floor. He had independently completed a high-difficulty debridement under atrocious conditions, but there was no sense of accomplishment. Debridement was only the first step. Would the wound heal properly? Would Pseudomonas take hold? Would tetanus set in? In a world without antibiotics, he couldn't guarantee the patient wouldn't succumb to postoperative infection. Still, at least for now, the surgery had gone smoothly. His life, at least, was probably safe. As for whether Vargo Hoat would develop a raging fever in a few days and decide to sacrifice this doctor to the gods, that wasn't Armando's problem. He had no intention of sticking around these bloodthirsty maniacs any longer than necessary. With that thought, he subconsciously touched the gold dragon in his pocket. "Pretty quick hands you've got, kid." A large hand suddenly landed on Armando's shoulder. Urswick, the deputy commander, leaned in close with a grin, his eyes bloodshot and feverish. Armando could clearly see the strange dark blue veins bulging across the back of his hand. "Looks like the operation went well, yeah." Armando smiled back instinctively. "Seems that way, my lord." But to his shock, Urswick's smile vanished instantly, replaced by naked malice. He clamped one hand around Armando's throat. The man was terrifyingly strong. As the grip tightened, Armando began to suffocate, a very real shadow of death creeping in. His right hand clenched around the gold dragon in his pocket, ready to activate fate's wager at any moment. "Let him go, Urswick." A deep voice cut in. "The boss still needs this kid alive to treat his wound." The speaker was a burly man covered in scars, small bells woven into his hair. Seeing Urswick ignore him, he immediately drew a curved blade and raised it threateningly. "Let him go." "Hey." Urswick glanced at him, sneered, and released Armando. "Such a loyal mongrel, Igo. Back on those stinking Dothraki grasslands, if you'd been half this loyal to your call, you wouldn't have been hunted down and forced to flee to Westeros." Igo said nothing. He simply lifted his chin and stared Urswick down. They locked eyes for a moment. Finding no satisfaction, Urswick snorted coldly. "Go on then. Kneel and lick your master's boots, Dothraki dog. I'm off to find some fun." With that, he turned and left the hut. Armando clutched his throat, coughing violently, when a large hand suddenly appeared before him. He looked up, grasped Igo's forearm, and was pulled back to his feet. "You saved Vargo," Igo said bluntly. That made Urswick very unhappy. He was hoping you'd kill the boss. He's wanted the captain's seat for a long time. "So that's how it is." Armando nodded, committing the information firmly to memory. Seems the brave companions weren't as united as they appeared. Internal strife could be exploited. "Thank you. Dothraki don't say thanks." Igo spoke stiffly. "Until we reach Harrenhal and Qyburn takes over Vargo's treatment, you must keep him alive. Otherwise, I'll kill you myself." "Don't worry," Armando replied with a smile. "You just saved my life. I'm sure we can be friends. I never refuse a friend's request. I believe in friendship, and I'm willing to show it first." Igo looked genuinely surprised. He'd roamed Westeros for over a decade, and words like these were something he'd only ever heard from high-born nobles. With a Dothraki's straightforward way of thinking, he couldn't quite understand this thin, unassuming farmer, but instinct told him Armando was fundamentally different from the peasants who had been slaughtered outside. After a moment's thought, Igo picked up a flat wheat cake from the table and handed it to him. Eat, Westerosi. He then pointed toward the corner, where Jaime was still bound together with Brienne. If you have strength left after eating, take a look at that man's wounds. Vargo forbade us from treating him, he offended him. Then why? Seeing Armando's puzzled look, Igo continued. But his father is Tywin Lannister. People say even the shit he takes turns into gold. I don't want shit. But if it's gold, no one can refuse it. So he can't die. In the Dothraki Sea, a man who loses an arm rarely survives. He fixed Armando with a steady gaze. Can you do it? Can you keep him alive until we reach Harrenhal? Armando glanced at the wheat cake in his hand, took a large bite, then broke into a grin. I told you, I never refuse a friend's request. But I won't force friendship on someone who thinks I'm disposable. When the day comes that I need your help, I hope you won't hesitate to lend a hand, my friend. You're called Igo, right? Remember this. My name is Odin. Chapter 4, I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. After finishing the flatbread and washing it down with a small pouch of water, Odin regained a fair amount of strength. Still, he deliberately rested a little longer, making sure he didn't look overly eager. Only then did he stand, walk over to Jaime, and squat down to examine his injuries. Criminal. Accomplice to evil. Before Odin had even touched Jaime's severed hand, a torrent of abuse rang in his ears. That damned man would have died from infection sooner or later, but you saved him. Do you have any idea how many innocent people will die because you let him live? Spare me, my lady. Odin didn't get angry. He calmly lifted Jaime's severed wrist as he spoke. Don't try to bind me with moral high ground. I don't happen to possess much in the way of morality. You, shameless. Seeing how utterly unconcerned he was, Brienne found herself momentarily speechless, her face flushing red as she struggled to find words. Shameless. That's irrelevant, Brienne of Tarth. He glanced at the woman, who stood nearly half a head taller than Jaime, and called her by her full name with precision. Everything I do is simply to survive. This world has never known true innocence. Can you honestly say you've never lied, or never done a single wrong thing? If I remember correctly, you once swore to protect Renly Baratheon, yet he was killed right before your eyes. Brienne froze. Her anger flared even hotter, but she couldn't find a single word to refute him. Odin, however, had no intention of letting her off the hook. I'm alive because I have a skill. Compared to those who were butchered, I'm lucky. By the same logic, the two of you are lucky as well. A lion may have lost a claw, but that's still better than losing its head. At the very least, you still have me, this so-called accomplice to evil, working myself to the bone to examine your wounds, making sure you both live long enough for your families to pay the ransom. Isn't that right? Though his words sounded like a lecture aimed at Brienne, they were, in truth, meant for Jaime. Odin had noticed it long ago. The man who once took pride in his swordsmanship had been utterly crushed by the loss of his right hand. He hadn't spoken a single word all day. If Odin wanted to carry out his plan, the first step was to make this lion stand again. Sure enough, Jaime, who had shown no reaction until now, suddenly twitched. He slowly lifted his head. In the shadows, those emerald green eyes seemed veiled in ash. He looked at Odin, who was carefully cleaning the wound with a warm cloth. There was no emotion in his gaze, only a deathly stillness in his voice. What difference is there between a lion without claws, and one that is truly dead? Hearing such profound self-denial, Odin wasn't disappointed at all. Instead, he grinned. A reaction was enough. With Jaime Lannister's mental fortitude, losing a single right hand could never truly break him. He was simply trapped in a moment of despair. What he needed was guidance. Rather than launching into a long sermon, Odin picked up the severed hand, finally cleaned of the filth that had caked it, and examined it closely. Let's see, uneven cut, classic chopping injury. They probably didn't use a fine steel blade, more like an axe. Cartilage mixed with shattered bone fragments. The wound's in terrible shape. The fact that it hasn't become infected or caused a fever yet means your constitution is exceptional, Sir Jaime. At the sound of Esser, rather than Kingslayer, a faint flicker passed through Jaime's green eyes. He lowered his gaze slightly and used his left hand to flick the severed hand hanging against his chest, making it sway. If you can reattach it, he said quietly, I guarantee my father will name you a Grand Maester. 1,000,000 gold dragons. What? Jaime froze for a moment, then slowly lifted his head. What met his eyes was Odin's utterly serious expression. Give me 1,000,000 gold dragons, and I can try to reattach it. Odin repeated himself, his tone unwavering. He wasn't joking. If he could recharge enough gold dragons and raise surgical operation to LV.5, it might truly be possible. But instead of hope, his words ignited Jaime's fury. Get lost. I don't need your treatment. The lion who had lost his claws felt mocked. He tried to yank his arm back. And Odin pressed down hard on the wound with pinpoint precision. "Ah!" Jaime screamed. Cold sweat burst out across his forehead, his body spasming violently. What are you? The pain response is still intact. That means your nervous system is still functioning. Just as Brienne was about to shout in outrage, she heard Odin speak calmly to himself. Congratulations, Esser. You're not in immediate danger of dying. Only when Odin removed his fingers from the wound did Jaime finally gasp for air, glaring at him in fury. Yet Odin seemed utterly unfazed. As he continued treating the injury, he spoke evenly. Among the Night's Watch, there is a ranger of exceptional renown. His name is Corin Halfhand. As the name suggests, he lost half of his right hand in battle. But the resolve of the Night's Watch far surpasses that of a certain Kingsguard knight. He trained himself to fight with his left hand, and in the end, made it stronger than his right. That's impossible. Jaime snorted, his voice dripping with contempt. No one can make their left hand more skilled than their right, unless they were born left-handed. Odin still didn't rise to anger. He simply shook his head. Don't say, impossible. There is no such thing. Corin Halfhand is well known. Ask anyone in the north, you'll hear the same name. Jaime's eyes suddenly brightened. A spark, long smothered, flickered to life in those emerald green pupils. He wasn't a man who crumbled at the first setback. Otherwise, he wouldn't have borne the name Kingslayer and still served in the Kingsguard for over a decade. With a precedent before him, Jaime's pride refused to believe he could be inferior to a mere ranger of the Night's Watch. He stared at Odin, whose eyes seemed filled with quiet wisdom. Why do you know so much? Unlike you great lords, Esser Jaime, Odin replied patiently. People as lowly as I am must always keep their eyes open. I draw close to my enemies rather than hate them. I observe them from even closer, because only then can I truly understand them. You intend to resist. Jaime lowered his voice, the corner of his mouth lifting faintly as he pressed the question. Just you. A farmer who knows a bit of medicine. Not me. Carefully wrapping the severed stump in clean cloth, Odin gave Jaime's arm a gentle pat. My friend. Us. Jaime let out another cold laugh. Look at the three of us. A farmer, a Kingsguard who's lost his sword hand, and a woman who was nearly raped. Forgive my bluntness, but the moment we reach Harrenhal, they may very well chop off your head. Of course, I'm fully aware of that. Odin shrugged, not denying it. Expecting gratitude from men like Vargo Hoat was far less realistic than hoping Brienne might suddenly become a refined lady. But under Jaime's gaze, Odin leaned closer, lowering his voice. There's something I understand very well. Women and children can afford carelessness. Men cannot. In the world I come from, a single misstep, or a single wrong word, can cost you your life. So, Esser, let's make a deal. His tone was calm, almost casual, yet deadly serious, as though discussing an ordinary business transaction. I will deal carefully with our current predicament and get you and your companion safely back to King's Landing. And after that, I expect to receive what I'm owed. Jaime flexed his injured arm, then exchanged a glance with Brienne. In her eyes, he saw only one word. Do it. Their situation couldn't possibly get worse anyway. A Lannister always pays his debts. Jaime Lannister seemed to become himself again, the confident knight of old, as he smiled faintly and spoke in a low voice. If you can help us return to King's Landing, I guarantee you'll receive enough gold dragons to fill an entire bathtub. But before that, I need to know your plan, Odin. I can't tell you everything, Odin replied, nodding. But I can reveal one part. Candlelight split his face in two, one half shrouded in shadow, the other bathed in light. That deputy commander, Urswick. He will be our breakthrough. You intend to support his bid for power. Brienne couldn't help interjecting, her tone disapproving. Jaime has already tried every possible means to bribe them. These mercenaries have no honor. No. Odin shook his head, a faint, meaningful smile curling at his lips. He slipped his hand into his pocket, brushing against the gold dragon he carried close to his body. Urswick will help us, not because he wants to, but because he has no other choice. I will make him an offer. One he cannot refuse. Chapter 5, The Art of Odin. Walking across the farm's soft earth, every step came with an unpleasant, sticky resistance, thick, clammy, and wrong. When he lifted his foot, there was a faint, wet squelch. Odin couldn't tell whether what clung to his boots was damp mud, or blood plasma that had long since cooled, congealed, and seeped into the soil. All around him, from the branches of the orchard trees, hung the very farmhands who had once labored beside him in Esser Finn's fields, sweating shoulder to shoulder. The dark silhouettes swayed gently in the night breeze, like overripe fruit dangling from the boughs. Odin didn't dare look around. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, walking as if he were a complete stranger, someone utterly unmoved by the tragic fate of those who had been his own kind. His status among the brave companions hadn't meaningfully changed just because he'd treated Vargo Hoat. He was still a prisoner who could be executed at any moment, merely a prisoner with temporary usefulness. And that sliver of usefulness was nowhere near enough to grant him freedom of movement. Perhaps once Vargo Hoat sobered up from his drunken stupor in the hut, Odin would be strung up on an apple tree without so much as a reason. Freedom. It didn't exist. Escorted by a bandit, Odin was brought to the edge of the woods. The two stopped. Go on in, doctor. Rorge the Noseless jerked his chin forward. He was hunched, bulky, and covered in coarse black hair, more ferocious looking than anyone else in the brave companions. Yet appearances were deceiving. Of all these criminals, he was oddly the most polite. For this meeting, Odin had rehearsed his words countless times in his mind. But to his surprise, when he made the request to Rorge, who had been assigned to guard him, the man agreed without asking a single question, sparing him the trouble entirely. Thank you very much for bringing me here, my lord. Odin said sincerely, bowing slightly, his voice steady. No need for thanks. Rorge grinned, his hairy hand clapping Odin on the shoulder. I never refuse a doctor's request. No one can be sure they won't get hurt someday, right? Go on. Urswick's inside. But I suggest you wait until he's finished before speaking. He doesn't like being interrupted when he's entertaining himself. As he spoke, his smile grew wider. On that vicious face, something almost like goodwill appeared. I'll remember your kindness, Lord Rorge. Odin returned the smile, nodded slightly, and didn't say another word. Taking a deep breath, he lightened his steps as much as possible and walked alone into the dim forest. After circling several apple trees, a small clearing opened up ahead. At its center stood a thick tree trunk. Bound to it was a mass of pale, wobbling flesh. Odin recognized him at once. It was Derek, Esser Finn's only son. The landlord's idiot son, Odin thought coldly. Not far in front of him, Urswick was fully absorbed in his game. Young Lord Derek, fatter than a hog, had been stripped of his upper garments and tied to the tree like livestock awaiting slaughter. Urswick wasn't using a blade. Instead, he held a sharpened wooden stake, slowly and methodically prodding and piercing the boy's greasy flesh. Blood seeped out, mingling with liquefied fat as it dripped down. Listening to the suppressed screams and pleas, a trace of sickened satisfaction actually crept across Urswick's face. As a physician, Lord Urswick, allow me to offer a professional suggestion. Ignoring Rorge's earlier advice, Odin boldly stepped forward and spoke first. What you're doing is far too inefficient. And it's very easy for him to go into shock from blood loss or pain, losing consciousness too early. Where's the fun in that? Urswick, who had been raising the sharpened stick, didn't even have time to get angry. He froze. He had tortured many people before, but this was the first time anyone had offered professional advice on his methods, using this tone, no less. What did you say? Frowning, he turned back toward Odin, almost wondering if he'd misheard. Odin shrugged, then pointed calmly at the chaotic wounds covering Derek's body. Superficial cuts hurt, but heavy bleeding dilutes the sensation of pain and easily causes shock. Damaging areas dense with nerve endings, like fingertips or armpits, does cause intense pain, but it doesn't last very long. As he spoke, he seemed to drift closer without meaning to. If you want more sustained, more profound feedback, I suggest avoiding major blood vessels and vital organs. Try piercing non-weight-bearing muscle groups, like the front of the thigh or the upper arm. Control the depth to about half a finger to 1 finger's length, and stay clear of the femoral and brachial arteries. That way, you create persistent, burning pain and functional impairment, without killing him outright. His explanation was so precise, so coldly composed, that even a veteran like Erswick felt a shiver crawl up his spine. But that chill was quickly replaced by a rush of excitement, of curiosity, like discovering a kindred spirit, even an expert. So this is what you call professionalism. Fuck me, Erswick muttered. Doctor, you're a real monster. He lowered the stick and stared hard at Odin, his eyes filled with a mix of shock, admiration, and intense interest. I like it. Keep talking. Please give me a dagger. Odin extended his hand toward Erswick, his tone calm, natural, as if this were the most reasonable request in the world. Raising an eyebrow, Erswick smoothly pulled a knife from his clothes and handed it over. Taking it, Odin walked up to the fat boy bound to the tree. Meeting Derek's desperate, hate-filled gaze, he spoke softly. I don't hate you, young Lord Derek. Even though you always enjoyed whipping us with the overseer, using your 300+ pounds to pin farmhands down and ride us like horses. Remember, you crushed 2 people to death. 3 others were crippled. As Derek's eyes grew unfocused, fear creeping in, Odin shook his head with a hint of regret. It seemed he didn't remember. That was hardly surprising. From the look of him, his intelligence was clearly below average, likely the result of inbreeding. It was said that Esser Finn had married his own cousin. I don't hate you, Odin repeated calmly. What I'm about to do has nothing to do with revenge. This is simply a necessary transaction. And in every transaction, not everyone benefits. Someone always has to pay a price. For example, you. SHHK. The dagger plunged swiftly into the thigh, twisted, then withdrawn, cleanly avoiding all major blood vessels. Derek let out a piercing, agonized scream. His body convulsed violently, yet his consciousness remained cruelly intact, forced to endure the sharp, unrelenting pain. See, like this, he can suffer for a long time, without dying right away. Turning back, Odin handed the bloodied knife to a stunned Erswick, his tone carrying a faintly instructional air, as though conducting a medical demonstration. This is what I meant earlier, control and efficiency. Erswick was utterly dumbfounded. The blood-stained dagger was right there, already removed from the victim's body, yet the fat boy was still writhing and screaming. The sustained agony was unmistakably real. Professional. Too professional. Teach me. Erswick licked his lips, his eyes blazing with hunger for knowledge and violent excitement. Doctor, I want to learn this. The corners of Odin's mouth lifted slightly. The first step, establishing a sense of shared identity, was complete. You may call me Odin, Lord Erswick. Rest assured, I'll teach you everything. Smiling, he placed the bloodied dagger into Erswick's hand. Then, abruptly, his tone shifted. The calm smile remained, but now it carried an unsettling force of persuasion. Still, tormenting an insignificant fat boy is merely a trivial skill. Don't you want to apply this kind of precision and control to something greater? For example, deciding who truly deserves to sit, permanently, in the seat of Lord of Harrenhal. Chapter 6, The Game of Power. Erswick's pupils shrank sharply. Gripping the dagger, he swiftly glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. What exactly are you trying to say, Dr. Odin? Meeting his hostile gaze, Odin didn't dodge or soften his words. He answered frankly, I'm saying this on your behalf, my lord, you've been shortchanged. Shortchanged. Erswick narrowed his eyes. The word clearly struck a nerve. Yes, shortchanged. Odin took a step forward. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried unmistakable force. I've heard that the brave companions followed Captain Vargo Hoat all the way from the Free Cities to Westeros, and under Lord Tywin Lannister, you helped seize the immense fortress of Harrenhal. But when the time came, Vargo Hoat switched sides for the title of Lord of Harrenhal, sold out the Lannister garrison, and opened the gates to the Northern Army instead. Urswick snorted, neither confirming nor denying it. Those events were common knowledge throughout the Riverlands. It was hardly surprising that Odin knew. As a member of the brave companions, Urswick felt no shame about betraying an employer. In fact, Vargo's defection had been encouraged by several of the old hands, including Urswick himself. They were sellswords, not knights. Honor was worthless. Only profit mattered. With all due respect, my lord. Odin continued, his voice smooth and compelling. The dirty work, the hard work, the dangerous work, you all did it together. Isn't that right? But when Lord Roose Bolton handed out rewards, every single benefit fell into Vargo Hoat's lap alone. His tone shifted abruptly, sharpening like a drawn blade. Lord of Harrenhal, what a beautiful title. It represents the greatest castle in the Seven Kingdoms, and a vast, fertile domain. And you. Half of Odin's face sank into shadow as he leaned closer, whispering into Urswick's ear like a devil. You, my lord, the deputy commander of the brave companions, and those brothers who bled and fought beside you, what did you get? A few empty words of praise. Or nights like this, seeking amusement in a miserable farm, torturing a child to feel something. Is that fair? The words cut like a knife, sliding precisely into the most unbalanced corner of Urswick's heart. His face darkened. The hand holding the dagger tightened, but he didn't refute a single word. Seeing the hesitation take root, Odin immediately pressed the advantage. To be honest with you, my lord, Lord Vargo Hoat's good days are nearly over. What do you mean? Urswick's eyelid twitched. He asked casually, masking his tension. Wasn't the surgery a success? Of course it was. Odin met his sharp gaze and smiled with confidence. My technique is second to none. Then why would you say? He already had a fever before I ever touched him. Odin replied calmly, methodically. I removed most of the necrotic tissue and delayed death. But that's like extinguishing visible flames while the embers underground keep burning. Frankly speaking, his medical knowledge is non-existent. Forcing a torn ear back into place caused severe infection, and then he drank heavily while already feverish. That's practically suicide. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice further, the authority of a physician unmistakable. At the latest by tomorrow, the fever will return, stronger than before. His body will burn, he'll start babbling nonsense. The process will steadily drain his vitality, leaving him extremely weak. But with Vargo's stubborn constitution, he might still manage to hold on until Harrenhal. And there, Bolton's maester will be waiting. Along with that physician named Qyburn, correct? If they take over, Vargo could very well be dragged back from the clutches of death. We cannot let him see Qyburn. The words burst out of Urswick almost instinctively. Exactly. Odin nodded immediately, then laid out the solution. We must make sure this ends naturally on the road. And I can precisely control that process. For example, introducing something less than clean into his wound. Quietly, invisibly. He'll suffer a persistent, worsening fever like any truly grievously wounded man. And then, one night, he'll simply pass away in his sleep. No one will suspect a thing. They'll all believe he died of his injuries, because that's exactly how the condition should progress. But there's one problem we must address. What problem? Urswick's breathing quickened as he pressed the question, unable to hide his eagerness now. The fever. Odin repeated the word slowly. When Captain Vargo realizes his temperature is rising and his mind is growing cloudy, even if he doesn't suspect me of foul play, he'll assume the surgery failed. And the first thing he's likely to do is have my head twisted off my shoulders. As he spoke, Odin spread his hands, adopting a posture of helpless candor. I don't want to die. And if I die, no one will be able to precisely control the timing of his death. Every plan we've discussed will fall apart. Urswick frowned. To be honest, he didn't care in the slightest whether Odin lived or died, but right now, he truly needed the man's cooperation. It had to be said, this move was exquisitely calculated. By openly exposing his own vulnerability, Odin didn't make himself seem weak. On the contrary, it made Erswick see him as cautious, far-sighted, and, more importantly, it bound their interests tightly together. Odin's life and death now directly determined whether Erswick's ambitions could be realized. I understand. Sure enough, after only a moment's hesitation, Erswick nodded heavily. A knowing, vicious smile spread across his face. Before that bastard finishes rotting away, no one will lay a finger on you. After all, a company can't do without its doctor, can it? Only then did Odin nod in satisfaction. Just as he had said, he would offer Erswick something he could not refuse. And for an ambitious deputy commander, what could possibly be more irresistible? Killing the captain, and taking his place. Captain Vargo Hoat will die of high fever within 3 days. Odin smiled, sensing the moment was right. As for you, my lord. He lowered his voice, enunciating each word clearly. Compared to dragging his corpse back to Harrenhal, you have a better choice. A shortcut, straight to the summit of power. The Kingslayer. The instant the name was spoken, Erswick's eyes flew wide open as he stared at Odin in disbelief. Yet the newly arrived doctor continued, loyal and methodical, painting him a grand vision. Remember this, Vargo Hoat was the one who cut off Jaime Lannister's right hand. Not you, Erswick. You can carry this, goodwill, directly to Lord Tywin Lannister. Think about it. To a father whose son has just lost his sword hand, this would be a debt beyond measure. And when Lannister forces retake Harrenhal, who do you think that title of lord will fall to? As Odin finished speaking, the enormity of the betrayal detonated in Erswick's mind. The risk was immense, but the reward was unprecedented. An alliance with the Lion of the West. A truly secure claim over Harrenhal. He stared at Odin as though seeing him clearly for the first time, this seemingly frail young man. After a long silence, he finally spoke. You're insane, Odin. But we betrayed Lord Tywin not long ago and swore ourselves to the king in the north. Will that Lannister truly believe in our loyalty? I need time to think. Of course, my lord. Odin immediately changed his posture, no longer pressing the issue. Caution is a virtue. A decision of this magnitude deserves careful thought. He knew better than to push further. Too much pressure would only provoke suspicion. The offer had already been made, an offer Erswick could not refuse. A golden staircase leading to Harrenhal's seat, perhaps even higher. The seed had been planted. Ambition had been ignited. Any more persuasion would only invite resistance. They fell into a long silence, each contemplating his own future. After a while, Erswick suddenly spoke. Odin. His voice returned to its former coldness, though the fire within it was unmistakable. He raised the dagger and casually pointed its tip at Derek, still bound to the tree. You've said a great deal, but I've received no guarantee. So, prove your resolve. Right now. Use the control and efficiency you just taught me. Send this damned fat pig on his way, and let me see your craft. Odin's face remained perfectly calm. He had anticipated this moment. In a world where the strong devour the weak, in a band made up of thugs and would-be kings, nothing built trust faster than shared blood on one's hands. Learning is everywhere, my lord. Taking the dagger, Odin walked step by step toward Derek and stopped. Firelight cast wavering shadows across his face. His eyes were as still as water. Strangely enough, for someone killing another human being for the first time, he felt no burden at all, just like the first time he'd held a scalpel, when even his mentor had praised his composure. This is just a transaction, young Lord Derek. He repeated calmly. In every deal, someone has to pay the price. The instant the words left his mouth, Odin moved. He didn't aim for the heart or the throat. With a flick of his wrist, the dagger slid precisely into the narrow gap between Derek's left carotid artery and his windpipe. Peeshk. Derek's obese body stiffened violently. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out, only a torrent of warm blood bursting from the wound in his neck. His pupils rapidly lost focus in the firelight. After a few convulsions, the heavy head slumped forward, lifeless. From start to finish, the act took only seconds, clean, efficient, no harder than slaughtering livestock. Turning around, Odin calmly handed the dagger back to Erswick. His expression hadn't changed in the slightest, cool, professional. Urswick took the still warm blade, then studied the pair of pitch-black eyes before him, deep and unfathomable in the firelight. Slowly, his mouth split into a grin, feral, satisfied, and full of appreciation. As if he had finally found his own kind. Very good, Odin. Welcome to this game of power. Chapter 7, The Principles of the Dothraki. By the time Odin was escorted back toward the hut by Rorge, it was already close to midnight. His conversation with Urswick had lasted a long while. For most of it, Odin had been educating the pervert, systematically, on the structure of the human body. The distribution of blood vessels. The pathways of nerves. The layering of muscles. The weak points of bones. These professional terms were like a key, opening an entirely new world to Urswick. After a lifetime of indulging in cruelty, he had never realized that the human body possessed such depth and intricacy. The torture methods he once took pride in now seemed crude and amateurish under Odin's clear, methodical breakdown. If Urswick had possessed even a trace of the ambition of some legendary warlord, say, a certain wife-collecting chancellor, he might have immediately showcased his personal charisma and taken this talent under his wing. Of course, that was impossible. No matter how ruthless or vicious Urswick was, he was still just the deputy of a bandit company. That said, under Odin's persuasive words, Urswick quickly began to see him as one of his own, and even granted him certain benefits. Feeling the satisfying weight of 10 gold dragons in his pocket, Odin couldn't help but reflect. He had earned his first pot of gold in this world far sooner than he'd expected. It had to be said, when it came to buying loyalty, Urswick clearly knew what he was doing. At the very least, he wasn't stingy. In Urswick's own words, Odin had already proven his resolve by personally killing a lord's son, and now it was Urswick's turn to ensure that Odin stayed firmly on his side. In this world, profit was always the strongest rope, binding together two otherwise unrelated people. 10 gold dragons. That was no small sum. In peacetime, it would be enough to fully equip a true knight, armor, horse, weapons, the lot. Even now, with the war having dragged on for over a year and prices soaring, 10 gold dragons could support a family of 5 for more than half a year. Urswick's generosity was plain for anyone to see. After all, even Jaime Lannister, arguably the wealthiest, second-generation heir, in all 7 kingdoms, had only a 1,000 gold dragon bounty placed on his head by the Lord of Riverrun after his escape. Recharge. Begin the draw. As he walked, Odin opened the system interface. Though he had never seen this much money in his life, he still poured every last gold dragon into the system without hesitation. Right now, the priority was simple: increase his strength. Only by surviving could he earn more wealth, and only with wealth could he continue feeding the system, over and over again. At present, aside from Surgical Operation LV.2, Odin possessed no innate skills at all. Under such circumstances, even a single LV.1 draw was crucial. At his silent command, the 10 gold dragons in his pocket vanished without a trace. The system roulette immediately began spinning at high speed. Ding tilde tilde tilde. Skill acquired, Insight LV.1. There was no explanation, just a single, lonely line hovering before his eyes, much like Surgical Operation LV.2. It seemed that, in the system's eyes, low-tier skills weren't even worth the effort of a description. Odin frowned slightly. Given his current situation, a skill that directly boosted combat power, swordsmanship, brawling, something like that, would have been ideal. Compared to those, insight sounded like a mere support ability, somewhat underwhelming. But just as a hint of disappointment surfaced, a cool current flowed into his consciousness, and suddenly, the world felt different. Tilting his head slightly, Rorge's ferocious face came into view. Attention unfocused. His gaze repeatedly drifts toward companions drinking by the distant campfire, distracted. Left leg shows extremely subtle irregularity while walking, likely an old injury. In barely 2 seconds, details he'd never consciously noticed before were automatically analyzed and organized. So that's how it is. Odin's eyes lit up in realization. This skill was practically tailor-made for his current circumstances. You can go in yourself, Doctor. Sure enough, when they reached the hut, Rorge didn't escort him inside as before. Instead, he patted Odin's shoulder amiably and spoke with forced heartiness. Deputy Commander Erswick says you're one of the brave companions now. If I ever get hurt, I'll be counting on you to patch me up. Just one warning. He jerked his chin toward the hut, a hint of disdain on his face. That Dothraki savage inside isn't easy to deal with. The captain trusts no one but him. Don't do anything that makes him uncomfortable. If he tries something, shout, and Fang and I will rush in immediately. With that, he turned away and strode toward his companions, clearly eager for a drink. This guy probably figured something out. Watching Rorge's retreating back, Odin calculated silently. This man, who looked all brawn and no brain, was surprisingly perceptive. He may have guessed parts of Odin's arrangement with Erswick, yet chose not to expose it, going so far as to offer a quiet reminder. Interesting. Odin narrowed his eyes. In times of chaos, it truly wasn't wise to underestimate anyone who had managed to survive the war. //. Pushing open the hut door, before he could step inside, a solid figure blocked his way. You were gone a long time. The Dothraki's tone was unfriendly, his eyes filled with suspicion. Yeah, took a dump while I was at it. Odin shrugged casually. I was hanging for ages, then did 2 surgeries back to back. Nearly burst. The suspicion in Iggo's eyes didn't fully fade, but he stepped aside and let Odin in. Glancing behind him, he asked, Where's Rorge? He was supposed to guard Captain Vargo with me. He went drinking. Odin walked inside and casually stripped off his tattered clothes and shoes, revealing a body covered in whip marks, tossing them aside. The movement was small, but deliberate. See, I'm not carrying any weapons. Only then did he sit down on the hay, stretching and rubbing his shoulders like an exhausted craftsman fresh off a long shift. He said you're here, so everyone can rest easy tonight. No need for his help. Looks like both the captain and Rorge trust you a lot, Iggo. It sounded like casual narration, but in truth, it was a subtle probe. Sure enough, Iggo snorted. Dothraki revered strength, and being discussed behind one's back was never pleasant. Still, he didn't continue questioning. Odin's posture made it clear he was completely unguarded. Odin glanced around. Vargo Hoat was still asleep in the most comfortable spot at the center of the hut, lying on a bed of dry hay and rags. His face was unnaturally flushed in the flickering firelight, reeking of alcohol, his snores thunderous. As for Jaime and Brienne, they'd been taken away by another member of the brave companions before Odin left. After all, Iggo alone couldn't watch several captives at once. Seeing Odin sprawled on the hay with no intention of checking Vargo's wound, Iggo frowned and walked over. It's time to change the bandages. Odin, you said yourself, every 2 hours. Ah, already that long. Odin reluctantly cracked his eyes open, looking utterly drained. He didn't argue. He pushed himself up and shuffled toward the still sleeping Vargo. After putting on a show of examining him, Odin suddenly sighed. What a tough man. Injured so badly, yet still sleeping so soundly. Yeah, guileless Iggo nodded. Captain Vargo is a true call. Since following him, we've never lost a battle. Odin merely glanced at him, neither agreeing nor disputing it. With Vargo Hoat's nature, the brave companions never lost, because their enemies were always carefully chosen, always weaker. His hands moved steadily as he began removing the bandages. Without turning his head, insight allowed Odin to read Iggo's expression clearly from the corner of his eye. It wasn't absolute loyalty. It was the Dothraki instinctive devotion to following strength. Odin smiled faintly and continued probing. I've heard that, on the Dothraki Sea, there was once an undefeated Khal named Drogo. He commanded over 40,000 riders, said to be the strongest in history. But later, he fell from his horse due to an infected wound. His Khalasar fell apart soon after. That's right. I've heard that too. Iggo seemed glad for conversation, his thick accent unmistakable. He was Khal Barbo's son. They say his braid reached his thigh, and he never lost a single battle. Odin smacked his lips. But in the end, he died. Didn't he? Even the mightiest eagle cannot escape the fate of falling. Exactly. Iggo nodded matter-of-factly. That's why his Khalasar scattered like startled horses, divided among new strongmen. This is the Dothraki way. When the lion falls, the hyenas feast on its corpse. A new Lion King is born in blood and fire. Listening quietly to this cold survival creed, Odin observed Iggo's reactions while skillfully unwrapping the final layers of bandage. The wound beneath had been cleaned thoroughly earlier, but now, along the ragged edge of the ear stump, a faint yellow-green discoloration had appeared. The surrounding skin was noticeably more swollen and inflamed. The corners of Odin's mouth lifted slightly as he spoke clearly. "That's unfortunate, Iggo. I think it's time you started looking for a new call to follow. Because our noble Lord Vargo Hoat doesn't have long to live." Chapter 8, Let's Make a Bet. "What did you just say?" The words had barely left Odin's mouth when a low growl sounded, and a blade of cold steel pressed instantly against his throat. Iggo stepped forward, one hand gripping his curved sword while the other seized Vargo's chin, forcing his head to the side for a closer look. Sure enough, the edge of the wound behind the ear had already turned ashen and dull. A small amount of yellow-green, viscous discharge oozed out, carrying with it a faint but unmistakable stench of decay. The Dothraki had seen countless wounds and deaths. He knew exactly what these signs meant. You promised you would heal him. You liar." Iggo turned and roared at Odin, fury blazing in his eyes, feeling as though he'd been played for a fool. The chill of the blade was painfully real. With Insight LV.1 enhancing his perception, Odin could clearly see how Iggo's rage pulled at every muscle in his face. Yet Odin didn't struggle. He let the blade rest against his skin, his voice unnervingly calm. "I am a doctor, Iggo. A professional doctor. I removed every bit of necrotic flesh from his wound. I did everything within my ability. But even the finest physician cannot save a patient who is determined to die." Odin stared straight into Iggo's eyes, his tone gradually hardening. He pressed dead tissue back onto an open wound, then drowned himself in alcohol during surgery like a slaughtered hog. "This isn't a failure of my skill. This is the gods reclaiming his life." His own stupidity rang the death bell ahead of time. Iggo's breathing remained heavy. His teeth were clenched so tightly they creaked, but he couldn't find words to refute it. Odin caught the flicker of doubt in his eyes and knew the moment had come. He stepped forward instead. Completely ignoring the blade at his throat, Odin calmly began rewrapping Vargo's wound. "Face reality, Iggo. The fever will come back. The wound will keep leaking foul-smelling pus. At most, 3 days. After that, he'll rot into a corpse in the midst of agony." With a knife at his neck, Odin displayed a level of composure that bordered on frightening. He locked eyes with Iggo. Insight allowed him to clearly read the violent contraction of the Dothraki's pupils, and the restless flicker beneath his forced calm. "Just as I thought." Odin said nothing aloud, but certainty settled in his heart. The Dothraki would never offer loyalty to a Khal who had lost his strength, and was already half a corpse. Iggo was not loyal to Vargo the man. He was loyal to what Vargo represented. The title of Khal, the authority of command, the power to kill without hesitation. And once that power began to rot, so would that loyalty. As the source of that power began to dry up and collapse, the Dothraki warrior's instincts awakened, stirring a primal anxiety over survival and belonging. "Why are you telling me this?" Iggo withdrew his curved blade and fixed Odin with a cold stare. "You could have pretended nothing was wrong. You could have dragged things out a little longer. What is your purpose?" He came from a nomadic people and lacked formal learning, but that did not make him a fool. Quite the opposite. Compared to most of his fellow Dothraki, Iggo was far sharper, otherwise, he would never have survived more than a decade in Westeros. Odin responded with a calm smile, and, unexpectedly, took a step closer, narrowing the distance between them. His voice dropped lower, yet carried unmistakable force. "Arswick told me to tamper with the surgery, to quietly kill Vargo Hoat." I agreed. The words were explosive. Shock deepened in Iggo's eyes. He instinctively started to call out to his companions, but before he could, Odin stepped closer again and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Dothraki follow only the strongest stallion on the grasslands, Iggo. When a Khal loses the ability to lead, the wisest choice is to seek someone new, someone with greater potential, to guide your path. You want me to swear loyalty to Arswick?" A cruel curve appeared at the corner of Iggo's mouth, his right hand tightening around the hilt of his blade. One more word, and Odin's head might have rolled. To Iggo, Urswick was vicious and treacherous, but in terms of strength, swordsmanship, or sheer brutality, he was nowhere near Vargo Hoat. For a Dothraki warrior like Iggo, serving such a man would be nothing short of disgrace. With insight enhancing his perception, Odin caught every subtle movement, but instead of reacting, he slowly raised a hand and lightly tapped his own temple. The gesture left Iggo staring in disbelief. Power doesn't always reside in blades and muscle, my friend, Odin said calmly. It also lives here, in the mind that pierces the fog, the eyes that see into men's hearts, and the hands that bend fate. A man who sees the essence of things in a single heartbeat lives a very different destiny from one who spends a lifetime blind. Someone like Urswick will never understand the true nature of power. If he gains it, it will destroy him faster than any enemy blade. What are you really trying to say? I, Odin, give you this choice, swear loyalty to me. Odin's tone grew solemn, as though invoking a sacred pact. Iggo burst out laughing. You, a farmer, can you even lift a sword? Faced with the ridicule, Odin didn't grow angry. Instead, an oddly confident smile spread across his face. How many years has Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West, gone without personally charging into battle with a sword? 10 years. 20. And yet with a single sentence, with one decision, he can determine the life or death of tens of thousands. Odin spoke with such certainty, with such natural authority, that even Iggo froze for a moment. But you're not Tywin Lannister, Iggo shot back. You're just a farmer who was hanging from an apple tree. If we hadn't passed by, you'd be a dried corpse by now. A man who can't even protect his own life, what right do you have to talk about power? At those words, Odin's gaze seemed to pierce time itself, returning to that apple tree. Hanging from a tree. He chuckled softly, there was something reborn in that laugh. You're right. That cowardly, ignorant, helpless man died on that tree. Odin spread his arms, as if embracing the world anew. His voice rang out, firm and resolute. I am no longer who I was. I was reborn on that apple tree. The gods granted me revelation, eyes that see through the mist, and the power to seize destiny. As Iggo watched in uncertainty, Odin slowly drew something from his pocket. A gold dragon, its surface glowing with a dim, muted light. Pinched between his fingers, held up between them, the coin seemed almost alive in the firelight. Emitting a faint, indescribable hum, Odin lifted his head. His eyes were sharp, brimming with confidence and provocation. You don't believe me? Good. Dothraki settle matters with strength, don't they? His fingers flicked. The gold dragon spun high into the air, tumbling end over end, its reflected light alternately illuminating the two faces inside the hut. Let's make a bet. Swing your blade at me, Dothraki. The coin fell back into Odin's hand. He grinned, his voice carrying a strange, indefinable force. Let's bet on whether your blade can take my head. Chapter 9, Fruit and the Flayed Man. Cold morning fog shrouded the farm, wrapping everything in a dull, ashen haze. Vargo Hoat awoke from his sleep with a splitting headache and a burning sensation tearing through his throat. Fuck this. He cursed hoarsely, his voice rasping like metal grinding against stone. Each heartbeat sent blood pounding against his temples, and with it came sharp, throbbing pain from the wound behind his ear. I drank way too much last night. By instinct, he blamed all of his discomfort on the excessive amounts of cheap ale he'd downed the night before, never once considering the possibility of a fever. After all, to endure the unbearable agony of the surgery, he'd had no choice but to drink himself senseless. Starting today, I'm quitting drinking. He clenched his right hand and slammed it down hard into the hay beneath him. His clouded gaze swept across the dim interior of the hut. In the corner, the doctor lay curled up in a pile of straw, wrapped in a filthy pelt, breathing evenly, apparently still asleep. At the bedside stood Iggo, arms crossed, back straight, keeping watch with unwavering diligence. Seeing the silent Dothraki warrior ease the unease that had crept into Vargo's heart with his weakness. A man who lived by the blade, who had even dared to betray Tywin Lannister, was cautious by nature, suspicious from the moment he was suckling at his mother's breast. Yet toward Iggo, he harbored a peculiar trust. After all, the Dothraki mind was simple. They followed only strength, like a well-trained hunting hound. What Vargo failed to notice was that Iggo's position placed him squarely between Vargo and the sleeping doctor, subtly angled closer to the latter. Rather than guarding the Lord of Harrenhal, he seemed more like a wall, deliberately or otherwise, separating Vargo from Odin. "Water, Iggo." Vargo spoke weakly. A waterskin was immediately brought to him. He uncorked it and drank greedily, gulping down several mouthfuls as usual. The cool liquid flooded his throat, only to scorch it like a blade scraping flesh. Ah! Cough, cough. He retched violently, racked by a fit of savage coughing before he could swallow more than a few gulps. After coughing for a long while, Vargo wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and raised the waterskin again, this time sipping carefully, small mouthfuls, almost refined, like a true noble. Iggo said nothing, merely watching. When Vargo's gaze drifted to Iggo's waist, his thick brows knit together. "Where's your arak?" That curved Dothraki blade had crossed the narrow sea with Iggo and had never left his side in over a decade. Iggo himself had once said that a Dothraki's arak was an extension of his arm, yet now it was nowhere to be seen. "It broke," Iggo replied calmly, his expression unchanged. "I threw it away." "Ha!" Vargo snorted, only to immediately aggravate the wound on his ear, drawing in a sharp breath of pain. Still, he harbored no suspicion. Iggo's blunt honesty had long since proven itself. If he said he'd thrown it away, then he had. "I've said it 1,000 fucking times, those fancy toys of yours are only good for slitting throats. Against a fully armored knight, they're worth shit." Waving a hand dismissively, Vargo then unbuckled the finely crafted steel longsword from his waist and tossed it to Iggo with exaggerated generosity. "Here, take it. You might not be used to it, but as my blood rider, you can practice swordplay with me from now on." He deliberately used the Dothraki term, trying to reinforce their bond of lord and subordinate. With a leering grin, he added jokingly, "I hear you Dothraki share everything with your blood riders, even your wives." "That true. Some calls do," Iggo answered. "Then perfect." Vargo Hoat burst into laughter. "When we get to Harrenhal, I'll grab myself a wife from the Red Mill. After I'm done with her, you can have your turn." Ha 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 ha. Watching Vargo's booming laughter, Iggo's fingers brushed against the cold steel of the sword hilt. He said nothing. He merely hung the weapon, so ill-suited to his own fighting style, at his waist, letting it replace the curved blade that had accompanied him for so many years. That silence, however, was mistaken by Vargo for tacit acceptance, and his grin only grew wider. He had said those things on purpose. Having just undergone surgery and still reeling from a night of heavy drinking, he knew his body could weaken at any moment. At a time like this, he needed to pull everyone loyal to him closer, to guard against that overly ambitious Urswick suddenly making a move. More importantly, he needed to return to Harrenhal as quickly as possible and let Qyburn treat him properly. A barefoot doctor picked up by chance, no matter how skilled, was simply not someone Vargo trusted, either in ability or loyalty. "Wake that bastard up." He stopped worrying about weapons and jabbed his thumb toward Odin, barking impatiently. "Move it. We need to put a few more miles behind us before noon, and find ourselves a wife sooner rather than later." Only after returning to Harrenhal and having Qyburn confirm that his ear was truly safe would Vargo be able to relax completely. And then, perhaps he could consider cutting out this farmer doctor's tongue, just to make sure he didn't go around talking. // Creak. The wooden door swung open with a teeth-grinding groan. Cold, damp fog poured into the hut, making Vargo shiver involuntarily. Outside, most of the brave companions were already mounted. Fine droplets clung to their armor and fur-lined cloaks, while the saddles were laden with valuables looted from the farm. The horses snorted, clouds of white breath dissolving into the thick mist. Even the two captives had already been tightly bound together on a single horse. Brienne held her head high, blue eyes fixed on Vargo, silent fury burning within them. Jaime, meanwhile, kept his gaze lowered. His golden hair was plastered to his cheeks with dew and mud, utterly indifferent to everything happening around him. Everything looked the same as yesterday. Unchanged. Even Deputy Commander Urswick, upon seeing Vargo emerge, hurried over with a fawning smile plastered on his face, looking faintly ridiculous. "Boss. 7 save us, you look much better today." His voice was exaggerated, but his eyes flicked quickly over Vargo's unnaturally flushed complexion and the slight tremor in his fingers. Urswic's smile grew even broader as he reported loudly. The raven was sent before dawn, straight to Tarth. It won't be long before that big woman's father piles sapphires as high as hills for her ransom. Knowing full well Vargo's complicated feelings toward the Kingslayer, he deliberately avoided mentioning Jaime at all. Vargo Hoat surveyed his men. Their gear was ready. The captives were under control. Even Urswic, that mangy hound who was always sniffing around in the shadows, was behaving with perfect obedience. All of it finally put him at ease. Even the weakness in his body seemed to lessen. Looks like that farmer doctor really does know a thing or two. Once they reached Harrenhal, when the king in the north learned that he had captured the Kingslayer, even Roose Bolton would have to look at him in a different light. As these thoughts swirled in his head, the lingering alcohol from the night before surged up again, temporarily suppressing the discomfort in his body. Vargo grinned, revealing crooked, yellow-black teeth. He took 2 steps forward, swung himself onto his zebra, and struggled to steady his slightly swaying frame before throwing out his arm with swagger. Move out. Back to Harrenhal. Bloody hell, this fog's thick, keep your eyes sharp. At the captain's command, the column began to move. The clatter of metal and the squelch of hooves in mud sounded dull and heavy in the mist. Vargo Hoat rode at the front, maintaining his unshakable air of command. He never looked back, and thus never saw the brief flash of malice that flickered through Urswic's eyes. On horseback, Jaime Lannister, bound tightly, lifted his head just slightly. Through dirty strands of hair, one lion green eye watched the final figure step out of the hut. Sensing the gaze, Odin looked up as well. Their eyes met in the fog. The farmer doctor gave no sign of acknowledgement. He merely drew a gold dragon from his cloak, flicked it lightly with a finger, and sent the coin spinning through the air, gold flashing as it caught the pale morning light filtering through the mist. The one-armed knight's pupils tightened. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head again, hiding himself once more behind the curtain of filthy blonde hair. But Brienne noticed something. Jaime's breathing, once as flat and still as dead water, had begun to quicken, ever so slightly. It was not fear, nor weakness. It was the restrained agitation of a lion long caged in shadow, finally scenting prey, forcing himself to hold back the surge of anticipation. The column gradually disappeared into the fog. The sounds of hooves and shouting faded away, leaving behind a farm steeped in silence. On the sparse apple trees, bodies swayed gently in the morning breeze, turning slowly, like fruit that had finally ripened. And among all those fruits, one corpse stood out above the rest. Its entire body gleamed with a fresh, damp crimson. Its skin had been flayed cleanly, from head to toe. Muscle fibers lay exposed to the moist air. Though the face was no longer recognizable, the blood-stained leather sash around its waist made one thing clear. This had once been the most powerful man on the farm. Chapter 10, More a lion than the Lannisters. Bear, bear, great black bear. Black and brown, all wrapped in fur. Bear, bear, oh, they say, come see the beauty. A beauty, he knows, but I'm a bear. Black and brown, all wrapped in fur. Scenting maidens, mead so sweet. Tear the dress and show the, ha 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 ha. On the muddy highways of the Riverlands, rough voices echoed through the air. The song, long since twisted beyond recognition, was bellowed out by the brave companions, its lyrics stuffed full of obscene vulgarities. Vargo Hoat rode at the head of the column, his hoarse voice leading the chorus. Though the wound on his ear still throbbed faintly and his head felt heavy, the loot from the farm and the enormous ransom soon to come put him in high spirits. The air was thick with merriment. Hanging from nearly every saddle were stolen goods and pieces of silverware, proof that, along the way to hunting down the Kingslayer, they'd picked up plenty of unexpected spoils. To them, war wasn't suffering. It was a feast laid out by the gods. At the rear of the column, the raucous singing reached Jaime Lannister's ears. He lifted his head slightly and sneered. If Robert Baratheon were still alive, he'd fit right in with this lot. That king so fat he could barely climb onto a horse, he always loved singing this song after whoring or drinking himself senseless. His voice was low, laced with the same irreverent mockery as ever. Even with one hand gone, with his former pride and honor trampled into the mud like refuse or a dead dog, and even after being tricked into drinking a whole skin of horse piss, he still hadn't lost that habit. Brienne frowned. Though captured, she never stopped holding herself to the code of knighthood. Any mockery of a dead king unsettled her. King Robert was a mighty warrior, she retorted stiffly. He defeated Prince Rhaegar Targaryen in single combat, and won the war. Hey, if I hadn't killed the Mad King, all he would have won was a pile of ruins. Jaime instinctively curled his lip in disdain. Catching Brienne's puzzled look, he paused, then quickly changed the subject with another barb. A king who ends up drunk in the woods, gutted by a boar. Poetic, isn't it? Just like us, an honorable Kingsguard knight and the Maid of Tarth, now prisoners of these scum. We're only in this state because we were outnumbered, Brienne snapped back. There's no shame in that, Kingslayer. Yes, outnumbered, Jaime murmured thoughtfully. Back then, Barristan the Bold could charge alone into tens of thousands and still take off Meleys the Monstrous's head. If I hadn't been locked up in Riverrun for so long, letting my sword arm and my bones rust, every one of these bastards could rush me at once and still wouldn't stand a chance. Jaime clenched his teeth, resentment burning in his eyes. As the youngest man ever to be appointed to the Kingsguard, he had never once doubted his own excellence. Hearing this, Brienne wanted to retort, but when her gaze fell on the hand that had been severed only because he had spoken up to protect her, the words died in her throat. She took a deep breath and, almost unconsciously, looked toward the front of the column, toward that calm figure riding ahead. You shouldn't have worked with him. That man, Odin, could have remained innocent. Instead, he chose to aid evil, betraying his own farm and his lord. Traitors are not worthy of trust. Trust. Jaime let out a soft laugh. Trust is rarer than Valyrian steel out here, my lady. And don't forget, sitting right behind you is a Kingslayer. As he spoke, he turned his head slightly, glancing forward. I don't need to trust him. I only need to know what he wants. And I'm quite certain what he wants isn't merely survival. This morning, just standing there, he looked more like a lion than any Lannister I've ever known. He even reminded me of. Jaime had been about to say my father. But before the words left his mouth, their low-voiced conversation caught Aego's attention. He spurred his horse forward and barked harshly. Shut your mouths. No talking. And you, cow, unless you want to see what it's like to be dragged behind a horse. Before Jaime could react, Aego slammed the pommel of his sword hard into Jaime's ribs. Ah! Jaime grunted as pain bent him double, but he clenched his jaw and made no further sound. Brienne glared furiously, but before she could speak, another voice cut in first. Hey, easy, you Dothraki brute. It was Urswick. He rode up and deliberately bumped Aego's horse aside, snapping. Don't break him. Whether it's the king in the north or Tywin Lannister, what they want is a living Kingslayer, not a corpse. That man's worth a mountain of gold dragons. Aego cast Urswick a cold glance, one hand resting on his sword hilt as he replied bluntly. Then watch the prisoners properly. Don't let them keep thinking about escape. If the gold runs away, I'll cut out your tongue and feed it to the horses. The provocation was unmistakable. Urswick's face darkened instantly, his hand moving toward his own weapon. What are you implying, Aego? Looking for trouble. At once, members of the brave companions began gathering around them, splitting naturally into two opposing groups. Just as Odin had anticipated. Behind Urswick stood Rorge, Biter, and the newer recruits. At Aego's side were 7 or 8 of the company's old hands. The tension became razor sharp. Enough. Shut the fuck up. Vargo Hoat's roar thundered from the front. He reined in his zebra and turned around. His eyes, bloodshot from both hangover and fever, glared savagely at the two factions. Keep moving. Anyone who starts fighting among themselves, I'll cut out his tongue first and drink with it. Vargo had long sensed the company's internal fractures, and Urswick's ambitions. But right now, his priority was getting back to Harrenhal alive. He had no intention of stirring more trouble on the road. At the captain's command, Aego snorted coldly and ignored Urswick's livid expression. He squeezed his knees to his horse and surged forward, returning to his position between Odin and Vargo, once again appearing utterly loyal. Urswick, meanwhile, stared darkly at Vargo swaying back, licking his lips as impatience churned inside him. In the end, he forced himself to stay calm and let the matter drop. The two groups soon dispersed, the column moving forward once more. Seeing Jaime lower his head again, Brienne asked quietly, concern in her voice. "Are you all right?" Jaime slowly raised his head. There was no anger in his eyes, no pain. Through the filthy strands of hair, those lion green eyes burned with a light she hadn't seen in a very long time. He grinned, feral and sharp. "All right. I've never been better, my dear Brienne." She froze. Jaime didn't explain. Instead, he flexed his remaining left wrist and quietly slipped a small, curved dagger into his sleeve. The cold touch of steel was like a spring breeze, awakening the lion long dormant within him. Instinctively, Jaime's gaze drifted forward. "Was it you, Odin?" He wondered. The thought seemed absurd. The man was nothing more than a low-born farmer, surviving only because of his medical skill. And yet, Jaime could find no other explanation for why that Dothraki had helped him, openly and in front of everyone. Then, in the very moment he lifted his head, Jaime's heart skipped. Ahead of him, Odin had turned his body at some point, now calmly looking straight at him. Those bottomless black eyes seemed to see straight through the storm churning inside Jaime's chest. Odin raised his right hand and placed a single finger to his lips. "Shish." Then, still seated atop his sorry horse, he inclined his head in a subtle, elegant bow. The gesture was so brief it felt unreal. Before Jaime could even react, Odin turned forward again, swaying gently with the rhythm of the column. Once more, he became ordinary and silent, as though that fleeting exchange had never happened. Jaime clenched the dagger in his sleeve, his knuckles whitening. That posture, that bearing, more composed than any courtier or noble he had ever met. "So that's it, Odin." Jaime drew in a sharp breath, excitement surging through him as the realization settled. "Compared to those useless Lannisters back home, you're far more like a lion than any of them. A true lion." Chapter 11, each with their own designs. Autumn in the Riverlands was always a mire. Even after the rising sun burned away the morning fog, the highways remained drowned in sludge, every step the horses took dragging heavy through churned mud. By the time the sun climbed overhead, a wagon piled high with looted goods sank deep into a bog, its wheels hopelessly stuck. The entire column was forced to halt yet again. Seizing the pause, Odin, under the watchful eyes of two brave companions, began changing Vargo Hote's bandages. Vargo slumped between two trees. One was an oak. The other was also an oak. Why say it twice? Because it padded the word count. By afternoon, the march had grown stiflingly dull. Up ahead, Urswick was barking orders at his men, trying to lever the wagon free. Their chants sounded weak and breathless in the damp air. Listening to them, Vargo suddenly shuddered. The dizziness surged harder than before. For the first time, he felt it clearly, something inside him was slipping away, like sand running through clenched fingers. That helplessness terrified him more than steel ever had. "Zalo," Vargo snarled hoarsely at his lackey. "Go tell those useless fucks to move faster. They're wobbling like whores who just took 20 clients in a row." What he wanted, desperately, was Harrenhal's walls. Only there, under Qyburn's hands, could he feel safe again. The fat man named Zalo scurried off, leaving only Iggo and Odin behind. Vargo's bloodshot eyes fixed on Odin. He lowered his voice, but the barely contained rage leaked through. "Why'd I feel worse?" he growled. "How's the wound, doctor?" "Poorly healed, my lord." Odin deftly loosened the bandages. Their edges were already stained a sickly yellow-green. He didn't sugarcoat it. His tone was calm, professional, honest. "The infection is severe, more aggressive than anticipated." "You quack!" Vargo exploded, lunging forward and grabbing Odin by the collar. "Did you even fucking treat me properly?" Odin let fatigue, and just a hint of grievance, surface on his face. "My lord, I swear by the Seven, I've done everything I can." "But you forcibly pressed necrotic tissue back into the wound, and drank heavily while running a fever. That's nothing short of embracing the stranger. All I can do now is slow the infection." "Slow it," Vargo sneered, suspicion instantly replaced by murderous intent. "You swore you could heal me." He thrust a finger at Odin and roared at Iggo. I've had enough. Kill this butcher, now. The silent Dothraki didn't hesitate. He drew the longsword Vargo himself had given him and stepped forward, his body subtly positioning itself between Odin and Vargo. Captain. Urswic's voice rang out just in time. He'd been watching closely. The moment Vargo reached for violence, Urswic abandoned the wagon and hurried over, his face plastered with false concern. My lord, how are you feeling? You look unwell, perhaps you should rest a little longer. And none of them were thinking the same thing. However, Vargo paid no attention to Urswic's concern at all. He merely repeated his order, voice hoarse and savage. Kill him, Iggo. Iggo raised his arm, but Urswic once again stepped forward, deliberately placing himself between Iggo and Odin. His tone turned earnest, almost pleading. Easy, boss. Don't do this. Your wound still needs a doctor. Even if this man isn't particularly skilled, he's still better than a bunch of ignorant brutes like us. If you kill him now and your injury worsens on the road, what then? As he spoke, Urswic leaned closer to Vargo and lowered his voice conspiratorially. If you ask me, we wait until we reach Harrenhal. Once Maester Qyburn takes over, then you can skin him alive if you like. His words sounded sincere, almost as if every sentence was spoken for Vargo's sake. And that was precisely why Vargo grew suspicious. His gaze flicked back and forth between Odin and Urswic. Uncertainty gnawing at him. Urswic, normally the cruelest, most bloodthirsty of them all, was protecting this useless peasant doctor. Coupled with the dizziness from his fever, a surge of betrayal flared hot in his skull. The wagon, Vargo growled, suppressing his urge to kill. How long will it take? Urswic's face twisted with apparent difficulty as he shook his head. Buried too deep. The mud's gripping those wheels tighter than the old Virgin of Tarth clutches her virtue. It'll take a while, might not even be free before nightfall. Then what the fuck? Vargo snapped, cutting him off. Are you still standing here for? Go help them. Or do you plan on wintering in this miserable forest? Urswic froze for a heartbeat, his sword hand tightening, then he broke into a grin. On my way, boss. With no excuse left, he turned and stalked off, shooting Odin a long, subtle glance over his shoulder, half warning, half threat. Odin inclined his head almost imperceptibly. Unfortunately, Vargo caught that gesture perfectly. His certainty hardened. That damned quack has already allied himself with Urswic. What were they plotting? Vargo narrowed his eyes, a thin, icy smile creeping onto his lips, as if the earlier outburst had never happened. So, doctor, he asked calmly. Based on what you see, what do you think is the best course of action for me now? My recommendation, my lord. Odin met his gaze without fear and answered honestly, far too honestly for Vargo's liking. You should abandon the slow-moving main force and return to Harrenhal at once, riding hard with only me and Iggo. The infection and fever are progressing rapidly. Time is critical. If we hurry, we might still control it before it worsens. Beyond saving. Vargo said nothing at first. He studied Odin coldly. He had expected the doctor to echo Urswic's suggestion, delay, stall, buy time. Instead, separate me from the men. So they could split the loot Urswic had scavenged along the road. Hey, short-sighted fools. Too cowardly to rebel outright, obsessed only with immediate gain. Vargo became more convinced than ever, this was a conspiracy. Still, he couldn't kill Odin outright. That would mean tearing the mask off completely and pushing Urswic into desperation, and a cornered dog was dangerous. A different plan began to form. Vargo waved his hand dismissively, as if Odin were already dead. Your medical skill has clearly reached its limits. Get out of my sight. Then he pointed toward the captives. Perhaps you can use that mediocre talent of yours on the Kingslayer instead. And if you happen to kill him. He chuckled darkly. Odin quietly packed away his tools and stood, hesitation flickering briefly across his face, as if he wanted to say more. But he didn't. Under Iggo's watchful eyes, he turned and walked toward Jaime and Brienne. Shadows from the trees swallowed half his face, hiding both expression and the faint upward curl of his lips. Good advice cannot save a man determined to die. As a doctor, Odin had already given Vargo Hoth the best counsel possible. If the patient refused to listen, there was nothing more to be done. After all, doctor-patient relationships had always been difficult. Westeros was no exception. Beneath the oak tree, Vargo stared after Odin's retreating back, cold light flashing in his eyes. After a moment's thought, he turned to Iggo and gestured for him to lean closer. In a low voice, he whispered, "Keep an eye on that quack. And, quietly inform Zalo, Timon, Pig and the others, tonight, find an opportunity to deal with Urswick and the 3 newcomers with him. Kill first. Ask questions never." Chapter 12, He Truly Understands Me. Odin carried his medical satchel toward the edge of the camp. 2 members of the brave companions immediately stepped in front of him, alert and wary. "This is Lord Vargo's order." Before either of them could question him, Odin lifted his chin, putting on an air of borrowed authority and cold arrogance. "I'm here to treat the Kingslayer's wounds. If he dies on the road to Harrenhal, don't expect to see a single gold dragon." The 2 guards exchanged glances, then grudgingly stepped aside, their eyes full of resentment as they watched Odin pass. "Damn it, what's a peasant acting so high and mighty for? If it weren't for Lord Vargo's orders, I'd cut you down right now." Under their hostile stares, Odin strode up to Jaime, crouched down, and began unwrapping the bandages around the mangled stump of his wrist. "The treatment is working," he said evenly. "At least the rot hasn't spread much further. But the necrotic tissue still needs to be surgically removed as soon as possible, otherwise, you may lose the entire arm." His voice was pitched just loud enough for the guards to hear. "Professional. Detached. All business." Jaime kept his head lowered, his voice deliberately weary. "And what good would that do? Would it let me grip a sword again, swing it like before?" As he spoke, he lifted his eyes slightly. A flicker of inquiry passed through those green irises. Odin's hands moved deftly as he replied, pointedly. "At the very least, a clean wound won't give you a raging fever in the middle of the night, one that kills you before dawn." Jaime's pupils contracted. He caught the implication at once. Nightfall. Yet he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let out a soft scoff, his tone laced with scrutiny and mockery. "Even if you save my arm, I won't thank you, boy. And perhaps once my father pays the ransom, I'll immediately ask Roose Bolton to have your head chopped off. The gold of Casterly Rock may not be enough to avenge my lost hand, but it's more than enough to buy the life of an insignificant, peasant doctor, just to vent my anger. Let me guess, how many gold dragons would it take to make the Dreadfort's lord agree? 500. 1,000. Odin didn't pause his work. Jaime was clearly warning him, "Helping me may not end well for you." But Odin understood Jaime Lannister all too well, perhaps even better than Lord Tywin himself. He raised his eyes and met Jaime's probing, derisive gaze. His voice was calm, steady, yet carried a strange certainty. "A lion may be forced by circumstance to roll in the mud, its golden fur stained and sullied. It may be driven to kill intruders to protect its den, or even bear a terrible accusation to prevent a far greater catastrophe. But I have never heard of a proud lion betraying a vow it once swore with its own mouth. And if such a day ever came," Odin continued softly, "it would never be because of the lion's own baseness or greed. It would only be because it faced a choice more noble still, something so important that it outweighed even its own honor." Jaime froze. Odin's words were like a surgeon's blade, precise, merciless, cutting straight into the deepest wound he had spent years refusing to touch. For years, the name Kingslayer had echoed across all of Westeros. Yet never, not once, had anyone interpreted his actions from this angle. Not even Eddard Stark, the man famed for justice and honor, had ever looked at him this way. For the first time in a very long while, Jaime Lannister felt seen. "He understands me. He truly understands me." An indescribable surge of bitterness and comfort crashed through Jaime's heart, shattering the wall he had built from anger, humiliation, and self-destruction. He stared blankly at the low-born peasant doctor before him. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Not a single word came out. Beside him, Brienne was utterly perplexed. With her straightforward way of thinking, all she had heard was a strange exchange about wounds and lions. She couldn't connect those words to anything tangible, much less grasp their deeper meaning. She wasn't the only one. Even the two guards standing nearby looked completely lost, unable to comprehend that anything profound had just passed between the two men. Then Erswick's roar shattered the moment. "Hey, you two, Timon, pig, are you both blind? Can't you see everyone's so exhausted they look like they've just bedded an entire brothel? Get your asses over here and push the cart." The two guards froze, exchanging uneasy glances. "But, the Kingslayer and this woman. I'll watch them." Erswick strode over, cursing loudly, his clothes conspicuously free of mud. "Useless trash," he spat. "This mercenary band would fall apart without me." Seeing his foul temper, the two guards didn't dare argue further. They hurried off toward the wagon stuck in the mire. Taking their place, Erswick folded his arms and cast a dark glance over Odin and Jaime. Without warning, he lifted his foot and kicked Odin hard in the shoulder, sending him stumbling. "Dragging your feet again. Get over here," scraped my hand pushing the cart. "Take a look." He marched off to a tree and sat down as if the matter were settled. Odin quickly finished wrapping Jaime's bandages. Before standing, he raised an eyebrow at him, his gaze flicking meaningfully toward Erswick. "Tonight, Esser Jaime," he said quietly. "Remember to remind me to change your dressing. ///." Odin picked up his medical satchel and walked toward Erswick beneath the tree. There was no trace of anger on his face from the kick. He crouched calmly in front of the man, opened his kit, and took out clean cloth and a waterskin, behaving as though there truly were a wound to treat. "Your treatment seems to be working," Erswick murmured, scanning the surroundings. His lips barely moved. "He's swaying badly in the saddle. But it's not enough," he added urgently. "Best if he meets the stranger before dawn." Odin dampened the cloth and wiped Erswick's smooth, unblemished hand. "He no longer trusts me," Odin said softly. "Just now, he ordered the Dothraki to cut my throat. I can't get close to him anymore, let alone tamper with anything." "Damn it," Erswick cursed under his breath, scowling. "Figure something out. Before dawn, try one last time. Poison his waterskin, his food, anything. If that doesn't work." A vicious glint flashed in his eyes as he clenched his jaw. "We move early. No more waiting. He cannot be allowed to reach Harrenhal alive." Lost in his own scheming, Erswick took Odin's silence as agreement. "And you," he continued after a moment, his gaze shifting toward where Ego guarded Vargo. A cruel smile tugged at his lips. "When it starts, you get close, and kill that Dothraki brute. He's Vargo's most loyal dog. He has to die first. Me. Kill him." Odin pointed at his own nose, disbelief written all over his face. "Are you out of your damn mind?" The man's arm was thicker than Odin's thigh. "What, you don't want to?" Erswick sneered. "You took my 10 gold dragons. Earn them, otherwise." His hand drifted toward his weapon. "I'll kill you right now." "Ha." Odin laughed inwardly. A neat little plan. Send him on a suicide mission. Whether Odin succeeded or failed, Erswick would conveniently eliminate 2 obstacles at once, Ego and Odin himself. Yet Odin's face remained composed. He even frowned slightly, showing just the right amount of reluctance. "If you've decided," he said quietly, "I'll try, but you'll have to back me up when it turns ugly." Odin's compliance pleased Erswick greatly. The man's grim face twisted into a satisfied grin. He yanked his hand back and shouted loudly for show. "Get lost. Clumsy idiot, can't even treat a scratch." Odin packed up his tools and walked away. But as Erswick reveled in his smug triumph, he failed to notice. Not far away, his captain was staring at him with a dangerously cold gaze. Every word, every gesture, had been seen. Chapter 13. A shattered cup is the signal. Thanks to Erswick, the wagon mired in the mud still hadn't been freed by the time the sun sank below the horizon. Night fell, and the brave companions had no choice but to make camp along the muddy Riverlands road. The campfire crackled loudly. The stench of cheap ale, burnt meat, and unwashed bodies blended thickly in the air. Vargo Hoat lounged beneath a crooked tree a short distance from the fire, stolen blankets piled beneath him. In the flickering light, his face bore a sickly flush. His cloudy eyes swept over his boisterous men, lingering briefly on Erswick's face, plastered with its usual false smile, before moving on to Ego, who stood silently at his side. "Did you notify them?" Vargo asked. I told Zorro and the other two, Igo nodded, then answered bluntly. As soon as they hear someone shout, "Long live the brave companions," they'll strike. Erswick and his men will be killed. And the others? I didn't tell them, Igo replied plainly. They can't be trusted. Vargo smiled in satisfaction. You're the one I trust most. Don't worry. Once we deal with the trouble on the road and reach Harrenhal, you'll be deputy commander. Whatever I have, you'll have as well. A grand promise, but Igo answered only with silence. Vargo felt a flicker of awkwardness. The Dothraki had many virtues, but flattery wasn't one of them. A man like that was dependable, yes, but somehow it felt like something was missing. If he'd said those words to Erswick, the man would have immediately gushed something like, "My loyalty to you is as endless as the Blackwater," or, "as unstoppable as the flooded Green Fork." Then again, if Igo did speak like that, Vargo probably wouldn't trust him half as much. You gain some things. You lose others. //. The noise around the fire grew louder. The mercenaries ate and drank merrily. A few men on the fringes were already drunk enough to start singing. Erswick laughed loudly as he clinked cups with those beside him, but the corner of his eye never left Vargo. Seeing Vargo and Igo speaking in low voices, even without hearing a word, made his heart jolt. I can't wait any longer. He took a sip of wine looted from the farm, then discreetly spat it out when no one was looking. Then, without drawing attention, he flicked a glance toward Rorge at the edge of the crowd. Rorge understood immediately. Swaying as if drunk, he staggered through the camp toward Odin, who stood alone by a tree, one of the fringe figures, excluded from the feast, seemingly idle. As he walked, Rorge loosened his belt as though about to piss. When he passed Odin, he deliberately slammed into him. Watch where you're going, blind idiot. Rorge barked crudely. He looked completely drunk. Yet in the instant their bodies brushed, he slipped a short dagger into Odin's hand with practiced subtlety. Hold on to it, Rorge murmured close to Odin's ear. His slurred voice sharpened instantly. When you hear someone shout, "Long live the brave companions," move in and kill that Dothraki bastard. The cold metal pressed against his palm. Odin froze for a heartbeat, almost wondering if he'd misheard. Long live the brave companions. Well then, the captain and the deputy really are on the same wavelength. Outwardly, however, Odin showed nothing. He smoothly slid the dagger into the wide sleeve of his tattered coat and forced a nervous smile. When the time comes, please keep an eye on me, Lord Rorge, he said quietly. I might not be a match for him. The Seven will watch over you, boy, Rorge replied gruffly. Then he staggered away, disappearing back into the firelight. Rorge snorted coldly. Now that Odin had clearly been marked as expendable, his attitude had grown noticeably harsher. He gave Odin's shoulder a perfunctory pat, then slipped back into the role of a drunken lout, staggering away and melting into the noisy crowd. The bonfire burned higher. Alcohol began to take effect. The singing grew increasingly warped and obscene, crude jokes bursting out one after another. Yet the true core members of both factions barely drank at all. Each harbored their own schemes, watching the expressions of others with care. A counterfeit sense of merriment hung thick in the air. Vargo felt the strength being siphoned from his body bit by the raging fever. He knew this was his last chance. Erswick. His voice wasn't loud, yet it cut through the noise and drew everyone's attention. Erswick's laughter stopped abruptly. He turned, locking eyes with Vargo. The false smile on his face stiffened, then bloomed even wider. He set his cup down, waved for his men to continue, and rose at a leisurely pace. One hand rested casually on the hilt of his sword as he walked over. What is it, boss? Seeing how guarded Erswick already was, Vargo didn't rebuke him. He simply pointed toward a bare, ancient oak tree at the edge of the camp. Over there. It's quieter. Erswick's eyes flickered. He glanced at Igo, then at the noisy crowd that had subtly split into two camps. In the end, he nodded. Sure thing, boss. He followed Vargo with an exaggerated stagger, acting drunk. Igo moved to follow, but Vargo raised a hand, stopping him. Away from the fire, the cold night wind made Vargo shiver again. He pulled his cloak tighter around himself, looking worn and haggard. Leaning against the rough bark of the leafless oak, he breathed heavily. Urswick stopped a few steps away, arms crossed, wearing that nauseatingly concerned smile, his eyes sharp and calculating. As if weighing the odds of killing him right now. After a moment's thought, he decided against it. For all his sickness, Vargo Hoat's swordsmanship was acknowledged by everyone. Even weakened, Urswick wasn't confident he could win a one-on-one fight. Urswick. After a brief rest, Vargo finally spoke. His voice was hoarse and tired, but sincere. Do you remember, back in the Stepstones, when we ran into that storm and nearly fed the sharks? Or later in Qohor, when you took an arrow for me while we were stealing that cargo of silk, you almost died. Urswick's smile faded slightly, memories clearly stirred. But he stayed silent. We fought our way here together, from Essos, Vargo continued, his voice low, tinged with emotion. For what? To carve out a foothold in Westeros. To finally have somewhere to belong. And now we do, Harrenhal. Even if Roose Bolton named me Lord, I never thought of it as mine alone. It was earned by all of us. Vargo paused deliberately, watching Urswick's reaction. Boss, you still remember all that? Urswick stepped forward half a pace, instinctively slipping back into his familiar act of loyalty. Taking that arrow for you was only right. Without you leading us, we'd have rotted in the gutters of the free cities. To be honest, boss, my respect for you is as endless as the Blackwater, as unstoppable as the flooding Green Fork. Enough. This time, Vargo was the one at a loss for words. Seeing that Urswick was still putting on a performance, he took a deep breath and spoke gravely. The king in the north keeps winning. Most of the Riverlands are already in his hands. The balance of the war has tipped north. Our choice wasn't wrong. But Roose Bolton, the Leech Lord, do you really think he'll let us sit peacefully in Harrenhal as lords? I've long noticed his ties with Tywin Lannister. If I die, Vargo stared straight at Urswick. How long do you think the brave companions will last? Bolton would sell you out in an instant to appease Lannister fury. As Vargo spoke, Urswick's brow furrowed. Painfully enough, the man was right. If that was the case, was his only option to use the Kingslayer as a pledge and defect to Tywin Lannister. Just as Odin had said, Vargo cut off Jaime Lannister's hand. What did that have to do with Urswick? But then again, if the king in the north truly won the war, would the title of Lord of Harrenhal ever fall to him? His thoughts raced wildly, weighing gains and losses. Without realizing it, Urswick's resolve to strike that night began to waver. Vargo caught the subtle change instantly and threw out his final bait. Don't be stupid, my old friend. As long as I make it back to Harrenhal, that cursed castle remains ours. Gold, women, power, whatever I have, you'll have too. Harrenhal. Urswick whispered the word, greed blazing in his eyes. The greatest castle in the Seven Kingdoms, worth more than a lord's title. After a long silence, his smile slowly returned. Vargo was right. Even if he killed Vargo on the road, Roose Bolton would never give him Harrenhal. As for defecting to Tywin, he couldn't be sure whether a one-handed Kingslayer might whisper poisonous lies in King's Landing. It was a gamble he didn't dare take. After much deliberation, Urswick smiled again. Just as I said, boss. My respect for you is as endless as the Blackwater. Without you, the brave companions wouldn't be anything. He spoke with deep sincerity and extended his arm. Vargo let out a breath of relief and laughed happily. Resolving an impending rebellion without bloodshed, minimizing losses to the greatest extent. He truly was a brilliant commander. Vargo reached out and clasped Urswick's arm tightly, the captain and deputy seemingly reconciled at last. But just as he was about to clap Urswick on the shoulder and suggest returning to the fire for a drink, a heart-rending scream suddenly tore through the crowd. // Long live the brave companions. Chapter 14, Chaos Erupts. 5 minutes earlier, Odin stood with his back against a rough tree trunk, shadow swallowing more than half his body. With the heightened perception granted by Insight LV.1, he could roughly track everything unfolding nearby. When Vargo called Urswick away, Odin immediately sensed something amiss. He never underestimated anyone. As he himself believed, women and children could afford carelessness, but not men. In a world where lives were cheaper than dirt, a single misstep could mean death. Every word, every gesture, all of it had to be measured, again and again. He had expected Vargo to strike at the traitor immediately. But judging by the current situation, the man wasn't quite that foolish. After a brief moment of thought, Odin inhaled deeply and stepped out of the shadows. Waiting passively for fate to decide. That was what idiots did. If there was no opportunity, then he would create one. Plan B, activated. As he walked forward, the timidity and servility of a peasant vanished completely from his face, replaced by an eerie calm. He headed straight toward Zalo, the fat man gnawing on roasted meat beside the campfire, and extended a hand. "Give me a roasted lamb leg." The words weren't loud, but they were firm, unapologetic. Zalo looked up, grease coating his round face. Momentarily stunned, half wondering if he'd misheard. He recognized this farm-born doctor who had survived on luck alone. Sure, the captain needed him alive, for now, but that didn't mean the man could get uppity. Seeing Odin's serious expression, Zalo snorted contemptuously. "The lamb legs for Captain Vargo, boy." He casually grabbed a half-charred lamb's head from the rack, barely any meat left, and tossed it at Odin's feet. "That's all you get. Take it and fuck off." Odin didn't even glance at the lamb's head. His gaze stayed locked on Zalo's face as he raised his voice slightly, repeating each word with deliberate emphasis. "I want the lamb leg." The provocative tone instantly drew attention. Several members of the brave companions stopped talking, turning to watch with interest. A lowly peasant daring to challenge Zalo. Had he lost his mind? As expected, Odin's defiance sent Zalo into a rage. He sprang to his feet, hand flying to his sword hilt. "You looking to die, you piece of shit? I'll say this once, only the head. Keep yapping and I'll chop you up and roast you too." Spittle nearly sprayed onto Odin's face. Yet to everyone's shock, the peasant didn't retreat. He leaned into the confrontation. "I'm eating lamb leg today. Fuck." Zalo snapped, ready to teach this insolent bastard a lesson. But a faster shadow burst in from behind. Bang! A boot slammed into Odin's side, sending him crashing hard into the mud. It was Iggo. "I've had enough of you, you quack." The burly Dothraki warrior planted himself between Odin and Zalo, rage boiling over as he shouted. "You didn't treat Captain Vargo properly. He's burning with fever because of you. And now you want to steal the captain's food. I'll kill you." Before anyone could react, Iggo drew the finely crafted longsword Vargo had given him and raised it high, ready to strike. The sudden escalation even stunned Zalo. "Wait, I was the one being challenged. Why are you losing your mind? This wasn't your fight. Don't do it, Iggo." Although Zalo was furious as well, he still retained a shred of reason. Seeing that Iggo truly meant to strike, he instinctively stepped forward, reaching out to stop him. "The captain's wound still needs this kid." His words cut off abruptly. Because the longsword that seemed to be cleaving down toward Odin suddenly twisted mid-swing and drove straight into Zalo's completely unguarded throat. "Ah!" Zalo's eyes bulged wide, filled with utter disbelief. He tried to speak, but no sound came from his ruined throat. He stared at Iggo in incomprehension, utterly unable to understand why the blade had pierced him. Iggo's face was expressionless. With a sharp twist of his wrist, he yanked the sword free. Warm blood erupted from Zalo's throat in a violent spray, and the body collapsed lifelessly to the ground. It all happened too fast. So fast that no one had time to react. Songs stopped. Laughter vanished. Tankards froze midair. Everyone stood dumbstruck, staring at the scene. Why had Iggo, the captain's most trusted bodyguard, just killed one of the captain's closest lieutenants? Then, in the dead silence, Iggo raised the blood-soaked sword high above his head and roared with all his strength. "Long live the brave companions!" //. The shout echoed through the woods like a spark thrown into a powder keg. Rorge and Biter were the first to react, ecstasy exploding across their faces. It worked. By the 7, even Iggo had been turned. The vice-captain truly was a genius. The advantage was theirs. On the other side, however, Timon, Pig, Togjoth, and several veterans who had been secretly warned by Vargo were utterly confused. The slogan was correct, but why had Iggo killed their own man? Had the plan changed, or... They had no time to think. The instant Igo's cry ended, Rorge, Biter, and the others, led by Igo, had already drawn their weapons and charged straight at them. Survival instincts kicked in. The veterans barely had time to draw their swords before steel crashed against steel. Clang! The sound of metal striking metal tore apart the fragile facade of peace within the brave companions. Those who had been neutral, who had no idea what was happening, stared in shock. A fight? Why? They didn't know the reason, but Igo had shouted, "Long live the brave companions." And he was the captain's most trusted guard. If he had drawn his blade, then clearly Timon and Pyke's group must be the traitors. Follow Igo. Kill the traitors. More voices joined the chaos, rushing into the fray. The brawl spread like a disease. In the confusion, blind obedience took over. No one truly knew who the traitors were. They simply followed the strongest warrior, hacking at anyone who looked suspicious, or who moved half a beat too slow. The camp became a battlefield. Screams, furious roars, and the clash of steel merged into a symphony of death. Firelight flickered, illuminating twisted, frenzied faces as warm blood splattered across the mud. // Meanwhile, beneath an oak tree far from the bonfires, the moment the words, "Long live the brave companions," rang out, Vargo Hoat and Urswick both jolted. The fake smiles they had barely managed to hold shattered instantly, replaced by pure fury. "You fucking bastard." Vargo's face turned ashen. He instinctively reached for his sword, but weakness slowed him half a beat. Dog. Urswick, ever alert, reacted faster. The instant he heard the slogan, he was convinced Vargo had betrayed him and struck first. With a roar, the hand resting on his sword hilt surged forward. Steel flashed as his blade shot straight toward Vargo's heart. Vargo, a warrior who had even bent Dothraki to his will, reacted with remarkable speed. He threw himself backward, barely dodging the fatal thrust. The sword tip only tore through his leather cuirass. Traitor! Vargo howled as he finally drew his own weapon, a heavy broadsword. It wasn't as fine as the one he had given Igo, but it was perfect for brutal chopping blows. In the darkness of the clearing, the two men fell into a fight to the death. Blades flashed. Figures collided. Each strike was thrown with full intent to kill. Vargo's strength and experience remained, but the fever had drained his stamina, making his movements sluggish and unstable. He gasped for breath, every inhale stabbing his lungs like needles. Sweat poured down his face, blurring his vision, and the broadsword felt impossibly heavy in his hands. Urswick, by contrast, fought like a slick eel. He never met Vargo head-on, instead dodging and circling, exploiting his familiarity with Vargo's style to exhaust what little strength remained. "Is this all you've got, Vargo Hoat?" A bloody gash marked Urswick's face, but his eyes burned with exhilaration. "Where's the majesty of the Lord of Harrenhal? Show it to me." As Vargo overextended after a heavy chop, Urswick suddenly ducked low and slammed his shoulder into Vargo's chest. Ah! Vargo staggered back. His already weak footing collapsed, and he fell hard into the mud. The broadsword slipped from his grasp, skidding several paces away. Seeing his chance, Urswick lunged. Only for Vargo to lash out with a desperate kick, smashing into Urswick's wrist and sending his sword flying as well. Seizing the moment, Vargo rolled and surged forward, pinning Urswick beneath him. His hands clamped around Urswick's throat. Then he lowered his head, bared his yellowed teeth, and bit savagely into Urswick's face. Ah! Urswick screamed as a chunk of flesh was torn free. Pain drove him mad. He clawed upward, fingers digging straight into Vargo's already rotting ear wound, gouging deep. Squeak! Putrid blood and rotten flesh spilled out. Vargo screamed even louder, his body convulsing as agony tore straight through his nerves. In the mud, the two highest-ranking men of the brave companions, once untouchable, now fought like animals competing for mating rights, using the ugliest, most primitive means to claim power and survival. Swordsmanship, honor, dignity, all of it had vanished. Only raw instinct remained. // And above it all, the true architect of this chaos had already climbed a crooked tree, sitting among the branches, quietly watching the carnage below with a satisfied smile. Hey, picked apples for over 10 years. Finally paid off. Chapter 15, Pick Up the Sword. At the edge of the chaotic battlefield, Jaime Lannister and Brienne stood back to back. Jaime's left hand clenched the dagger tightly. With a sharp twist, the tough rope binding them snapped apart. Brienne wrenched free, as well, finally regaining her freedom. But the sight before them left both momentarily at a loss. The camp had completely devolved into a slaughterhouse. Members of the brave companions were hacking at one another in scattered clusters, utterly indiscriminate, no longer able, or willing, to tell friend from foe. Firelight leapt wildly, illuminating twisted, feral faces. Blood sprayed freely, severed limbs littered the ground. Which side do we help? Brienne's blue eyes were filled with confusion. Even with her formidable strength, the sheer scale and randomness of the chaos left her unsure where to begin. Jaime flexed his newly freed left hand, his green eyes sweeping across the battlefield as he let out a snort. "Who cares?" he said lightly. "Kill whoever's in front of you. They're all bandits who deserve the seventh hell anyway. Clean them out, and the Riverlands might finally breathe a little easier." Brienne nodded in firm agreement. Before being captured, she had fought, and killed, her share of brigands and outlaws. But never had she encountered a group as utterly repugnant as this one. The brave companions felt like a living concentration of all the world's filth. Just as she was about to step into the fray, a burly figure stumbled amid the melee and crashed straight to the ground at Brienne's feet. She looked down, and the two locked eyes. "Wog! Wog!" both roared at the same time. But Brienne's shout was louder, deeper, and far more terrifying. She reacted instantly, throwing her powerful arms around the man's neck and locking him into a rear chokehold. The man was no weakling. He struggled violently, then froze in shock. He couldn't break free. This woman's strength was monstrous. Modern medicine says it takes 30 to 40 seconds to choke someone unconscious, but this was a battlefield where every heartbeat mattered. As the two struggled, SHHK, a dagger slipped effortlessly through the gap in the man's leather armor and plunged straight into his heart. The fight ended instantly. Jaime pulled the blade free, wiped it on the dead man's clothes, and raised an eyebrow at Brienne, who was still catching her breath. "Killing requires weapons, my lady." He smirked faintly. "Your method is far too inefficient." Yet instead of gratitude, Brienne stared at the corpse on the ground, then at the dagger in Jaime's hand. Her brow furrowed, disapproval written plainly across her face. "That wasn't knightly," she said flatly. "Kingslayer." She pursed her lips, bent down, and picked up the longsword the dead man had dropped. Before Jaime could retort, she let out a thunderous roar. "Wog!" and charged straight into the battlefield. Clearly, being bound and helpless for so many days had nearly driven her mad. TCH. Jaime spat in irritation at being called Kingslayer. He watched her retreating back but didn't immediately follow. Did this woman's head contain nothing but honor and duty? Chivalry, here, of all places, among this rabble. What a joke. Just then, a calm voice spoke from above. "Don't try to be a hero. Just survive." Jaime jerked his head up. Odin had somehow climbed onto a nearby tree, crouched among the branches, looking down at the carnage below. Firelight cast broken shadows across his face, obscuring his expression, but those deep, unfathomable black eyes remained perfectly clear, cold, composed. After time passes, Odin continued softly, "Heroes tend to look a little foolish, don't they?" His voice wasn't loud, yet it carried a strange authority, as though he were stating an obvious truth. Jaime paused, then snorted, turning his gaze back toward the darkness ahead. "I can't agree with you, Lord Odin," he said firmly. "Some things are worth doing even when you know they're foolish. Even when you know they're impossible. Even when you know they'll cost you everything." Beneath the oak tree, the struggle had ended. Vargo Hoat spat out a chunk of flesh and sucked in ragged breaths. Where his left eye had been was now a ruined, bloody hollow. He had won. He'd killed the traitor, torn out his throat like a beast, but the price had been an eye. He staggered upright from Urswic's corpse. Fever, blood loss, and pain sent waves of dizziness crashing through him. Standing alone took everything he had. Ahead, the camp was still a howling inferno of slaughter. Men hacked at one another like mad dogs, striking anything that moved. Watching the brave companions, his creation, tear itself apart, Vargo didn't try to stop it. He couldn't. He barely had the strength to save himself. Turning away, he staggered toward the edge of the woods. His gaze dropped, and there it was. His greatsword. Instinctively, he bent to retrieve it. Just as his fingers neared the hilt, a mud-caked boot slammed down on the blade. Cold steel kissed his throat, lifting his chin. Vargo raised his head. Standing before him was the Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister. Somehow, Jaime had acquired a longsword. His remaining left hand gripped it tightly, the blade pressed against Vargo's neck. Filthy golden hair clung to his brow, and his green eyes, hard, empty, held no warmth at all. Though thinner from captivity and wounds, he stood like an immovable wall. Vargo froze. Then he grinned, blood staining his teeth. Well, he rasped mockingly. If it isn't the noble Esser Jaime Lannister. What's wrong? Don't want to lose the other hand too. His gaze flicked to Jaime's empty right sleeve. Vargo tried to straighten, to summon his old authority, but his swaying body betrayed his weakness. Jaime saw it. He also saw the flicker of fear in Vargo's remaining eye. I've never met anyone as shameless as you, Vargo Hoat, Jaime said evenly, as if delivering a sentence. People curse others to the seven hells. Honestly, I think that place suits you perfectly. Vargo spat bloody saliva and snarled, venom blazing in his eye. You're no better than me, Kingslayer. You're a traitor too, your hands are stained with a king's blood. We're the same. Go on, stab me. I'll be waiting in hell for you. There's probably already a place saved for you. He roared, trying to cloak his terror in bravado. But Jaime saw through it instantly. What a pity. The heir of Casterly Rock slowly shook his head, his voice carrying a grave, almost merciful resolve. I'm not like you, Vargo Hoat. Even for someone as vile as you, I'm willing to grant a fair duel. Then, before Vargo's disbelieving eye, Jaime stepped back. He lifted his foot from the greatsword. Pick it up, Jaime commanded sharply. I said, pick up the sword. Chapter 16, A Lannister always pays his debts. Shame seared through Vargo Hoat's pride the instant Jaime stepped back. With a guttural snarl he lunged, snatching up the greatsword with both hands. Unlike the Kingslayer, Vargo had no concept of honor. The moment steel touched his palms, he struck first. He roared and chopped downward with all the strength of a maddened ox. Had that blow landed, Jaime's feeble left-handed guard would never have held. But fever blurred Vargo's vision, his missing eye destroyed his depth perception, and his swing came down crooked, missing Jaime by half a foot. Jaime moved on instinct. A shift of the hips, a small step sideways, nothing graceful, yet precise, the ghosts of 1,000 drills at Casterly Rock guiding his body. His right hand twitched to counterattack, only for the phantom limb to remind him again of what he'd lost. He grimaced and thrust awkwardly with the left instead. But what was once his blade now felt like a stubborn iron bar. The thrust hit, but harmlessly, clang. His sword scraped Vargo's thick breastplate, sending a painful shock up Jaime's arm. His wrist spasmed, the blade nearly slipped free. Vargo snarled and swung again, a wild sideways sweep. Jaime hopped back, nearly tripping, and the greatsword whooshed past his waist, shredding his tunic. They clashed like this for several breaths. Vargo's slashes wide and furious, often missing. Jaime's counters sharp in angle, but weak in power. One blinded berserker, one maimed prodigy, both reduced to clumsy shadows of who they had once been. Gods, Jaime thought bitterly, my sword work is worse than when I was a page at Sumner Crackhal's side. Back then his movements had been instinct, fluid as water and twice as deadly. Even Esser Arthur Dayne had once remarked on the boy's talent. Now, two former masters of the blade resembled boys flailing with sticks in the mud. The thought stung him to the core. But somehow, it also cleared his mind. Breath by breath, his footwork adjusted, his balance returned. His body remembering what his pride had forgotten. Vargo, meanwhile, staggered under fever and blood loss. Every failed swing drained him further, every missed step fed his desperation. Then came Jaime's moment. Vargo overextended. Jaime struck. Steel flashed. Squelch. Blood erupted from Vargo's wrist as Jaime's sword bit deep. Not enough to sever the hand cleanly, his left arm could not deliver such force. But enough to send the greatsword crashing into the mud. Vargo collapsed with it, howling, his half-severed hand dangling by sinew. Jaime glanced at the mangled limb, and a spark of regret flickered behind his eyes. If I still had my right hand, that would have come off entirely. Breathing hard, he advanced, sword leveled once more at Vargo's throat. Revenge, finally, within reach. But then, that woman, she's dying. Vargo's scream tore across the clearing. Jaime's heart clenched. Brienne. Every instinct screamed lie, but his body turned anyway, head snapping toward the battlefield. There was nothing. Idiot. He realized the deceit a heartbeat too late. Vargo surged upward from the mud like a wounded boar, slamming into Jaime's left arm. Crack. The sword flew from Jaime's hand, spinning through the air before vanishing into the shadows. Vargo staggered upright, cackling through blood and broken teeth. With his remaining hand he drew a skinning dagger from his boot, madness burning in his lone eye. Stupid fool, he spat. Always were, always will be. Jaime was unarmed. Vargo pressed forward like a rabid dog, copper blade flicking again and again. Jaime danced back on raw instinct alone, but the dagger was fast, and Vargo's remaining hand maddeningly precise. Thin crimson lines bloomed across Jaime's ribs and shoulder. Left-handed, exhausted, bleeding, the Kingslayer gritted his teeth. Just when the blade in Vargo Hote's hand was inches from Jaime's flesh. A calm voice, dry, almost amused, cut through the night. I warned you, Jaime Lannister, don't play the hero. Both men froze mid-movement, breath ragged, torsos heaving, and turned toward the source of the voice. There stood Odin, as if he had been there all along. At his side was Iggo, the silent Dothraki, hovering half a step behind the doctor like a shadow carved from iron. The moment Vargo saw him, hope flared wildly in his bloodshot eye. He strained his ruined throat and screamed, Iggo, my blood-sworn brother, kill the Kingslayer, now. Harrenhal's wealth, I'll split it with you, no, take all of it. But Iggo did not move, did not blink. Did not even acknowledge the bribe or the desperation bleeding through Vargo's voice. The battlefield behind them had nearly fallen silent. Only a few distant metal clashes remained, and somewhere in the dark a woman was still howling a barbaric wog. With terrifying endurance, the triumph on Vargo's face curdled into dread. He spat venom. You ungrateful Dothraki cur, how dare you betray me? I armed you. I called you brother. You thank me with treachery. Iggo still said nothing. Instead, he slowly unfastened the steel longsword Vargo had once gifted him, lifted it. And in one smooth motion let it drop. Thud. The sword embedded itself point first into the mud. Right in front of Jaime Lannister. Jaime's fingers tightened around the hilt. He pushed himself upright, unsteady, but resolute. Vargo's eye widened. Horror flooded him. He tried to surge forward. Tried to stop this. Tried to deny the future barreling toward him. But fever finally crushed what remained of his strength. His vision swam, the world tilted, and his knees buckled beneath him. Jaime stepped once, twice, and faced the man who had taken his sword hand. No flourish. No flourish was needed. Just a clean thrust, decades of training condensed into a single motion. The blade slid through Vargo Hote's throat as easily as a needle passing silk. For Vargo, all things ended in that moment. Ambition, cruelty, grudges, triumphs, nightmares. Everything snuffed out like a guttering candle. His lone eye bulged wide, locked on Jaime's face. Then the light left it. The body toppled backward into the mud. The same mud that had swallowed his carriage, his pride, and finally his life. Jaime released the sword and let it stand upright in Vargo's throat like a headstone. In the distance, Brienne's final, thunderous, wog faded into silence. Jaime exhaled, long, weary, almost relieved. With his left hand, he tore from his neck the token of humiliation he'd been forced to wear. His severed right hand. I don't need it anymore. He dropped the grisly trophy atop Vargo's corpse. Take it with you. Go share your grave in the seventh hell. He turned away without another glance. Behind him, Odin leaned against a twisted tree, the firelight flickering across his features like shifting masks. His expression was unreadable, but his dark eyes gleamed with something sharp and calculating. Not a wise choice, Sir Jaime. You could have ended him quickly, yet chose a fair duel instead. You risked your life for honor. Jaime stopped. looked back over his shoulder, blood and exhaustion fading beneath a thin smile that carried the old glint, the spark of the golden lion he once was. The same glint he had back when he crossed blades with the smiling knight. "I don't lose duels, Odin." He wiped the blood from his face with his sleeve, raised his chin, and declared, voice steady as steel. "And don't you forget, I still owe you a bathtub full of gold." His eyes gleamed. A Lannister always pays his debts. Chapter 17, Friends. Dawn returned to the Riverlands with a thin veil of mist drifting once more across the road. A heavy stench of blood hung over the abandoned camp. The fires had long since died. No more screams. No more clashing steel. The uprising, long brewing beneath the surface, had burned itself out overnight. Most of the brave companions had never understood what sparked the slaughter. They were too stunned, too drunk, or simply too slow to react. By the time Ego and Brienne, those two walking calamities, waded into the fighting, the outcome had already been sealed. By sunrise, almost none of those who joined the melee still drew breath. Among the trees, Ego moved swiftly and silently. From corpse to corpse, he gathered what could still be used. Coin purses, intact swords, a half loaf of stale bread, anything not yet spoiled. His movements were efficient, almost methodical. There was no grief, no disgust, no hesitation. He looked less like a looter and more like a reaper harvesting grain. Of course, Dothraki never planted grain to begin with. Not far away, Brienne of Tarth knelt with one knee to the ground, sword planted before her, forehead resting against her perspiring wrist. Her lips moved in silent prayer, likely to the father, perhaps the mother. The familiar cadences of the faith of the Seven. No one approached her, the aura of sincerity around her made even corpses feel like they should avert their gaze. At the center of the camp, beneath the least blood-stained oak tree they could find, Odin worked. The small surgical blade in his hand glowed red each time he heated it over a rekindled flame. When the metal cooled, he made clean, deliberate incisions along Jaime Lannister's ruined wrist. With the chaos finally quelled and prying eyes no longer watching his every move, Odin could, at last, practice medicine properly. His hands were steady, his breathing, calm, his mind, unshaken. The trial run he'd conducted on Vargo Hoat had tempered him. After that ordeal, even performing surgery in a forest thick with filth, mold, and death no longer raised his pulse. In truth, it felt as though some unseen force had decided Jaime Lannister was not meant to die yet. After all, when the Kingslayer first lost his hand, he rolled through mud, soaked in urine, even brushed against horse dung. And yet his wound never once showed signs of infection. Odin had no explanation for it. No anatomy, no theory of humors, no alchemical chart could make sense of it. So he did what every rational man eventually does in Westeros. He blamed it on fate. The heated blade slid through necrotic flesh with practiced ease, removing what could no longer be saved, carving away decay, cutting down to clean, bleeding red where life still clung stubbornly to bone. Jaime clenched his jaw but did not cry out. Odin worked without comment. The silence between them was not awkward, merely quiet, like two soldiers tending wounds after battle, as if they had done this 100 times before. Far away, a crow cawed. And through the mist, the first rays of sun glinted against the surgical knife as Odin sliced away the last strip of dead flesh. Like a tailor cutting away ruined cloth to prepare a garment worth wearing once more. There was only one person who truly felt every motion of his blade. NGH. Sweat poured from Jaime Lannister's brow. Even with his teeth clenched shut, raw cries escaped him, loud, unrestrained, and utterly undignified. His remaining hand dug into the soil beneath him, packing mud beneath his fingernails as he fought the urge to thrash. "Relax a little, Esser," Odin murmured without looking up, his tone maddeningly even, like someone discussing tomorrow's weather. "Your screams are more pitiful than a little girl being cornered by a septon." A beat. "Oh, but septons don't like little girls, do they?" Another beat. "Tell me, were you ever bothered by a septon in your youth, Esser Jaime? Gods, listen to me rambling. You're Tywin Lannister's firstborn, Lord of Casterly Rock in all but name. Who in the 7 kingdoms would dare? Shut your mouth, Odin. Jaime hissed the words through his teeth, face twisted in agony and outrage. It felt unfair, wrong, that someone could cut into his flesh with such ease, and yet still find breath to speak. How had he not noticed earlier that the man was an incorrigible chatterbox? The knife isn't in your arm, Jaime snarled, trembling. Easy for you to, gah. The timing was perfect. Odin's blade slipped through another strip of necrotic tissue just as Jaime tried to retort. True enough, Esser, Odin replied, this time without mockery, only a rare hint of respect. In a place like this, without milk of the poppy, most men would be unconscious by now. But you're still here, awake. Breathing, cursing. I'll admit it. He paused long enough to cut away a final stubborn piece of rot. You're far tougher than Vargo Hoat ever was. It was absurd, ridiculous, even, that such a comparison could bring joy in this moment. Yet Jaime's expression shifted instantly. Through pain-twisted features and gritted teeth, a proud, foolish grin emerged. To be told he surpassed the man who maimed him, it delighted him more than it should have. Neither man spoke after that. Only the sound of steel, careful stitching, and Jaime's occasional suppressed groan filled the space. When the final blackened scrap of flesh was removed, Odin rinsed the wound with boiled water, wiped it clean, spread honey across the fresh sutures, and wrapped the bandage with practiced ease. He finished by tying a neat little bow, an elegant flourish completely at odds with the grisly operation. The transformation was near farcical. A brutal battlefield surgery ending with a dainty knot. Jaime stared at his wrist, face damp with sweat, expression caught somewhere between horror and disbelief. Then he let out a breathless laugh, half pained, half genuine. Your skill is, God's, it's almost unsettling, Odin, he admitted. In treating wounds, I dare say even Grand Maester Pycelle would struggle to match you. Jaime's gaze lingered on Odin's bare neck, no maester's chain, no sigil of training, just rough cloth and bloodstains. As a farmer, he asked, genuinely curious, how did you learn all this? For a heartbeat Odin's hands paused. He lifted his gaze, met Jaime's eyes, and smiled faintly, a smile that revealed everything and nothing all at once. Every man in this world carries secrets, Esser Jaime, he said softly. I have never asked about yours, why you fell so far, why you wanders these roads, why you bear certain burdens. He flicked his eyes toward the discarded golden stump. So I hope, as a friend, you can grant me the same courtesy. / friend. The word struck Jaime like a mace to the chest. He had titles beyond counting, heir of Casterly Rock, son of Tyrion Lannister, the Kingslayer, a knight of the Kingsguard. But friend, that one had always eluded him. All his life, he had stood surrounded by people, laughing, flattering, bowing, but their smiles were for the minds beneath Casterly Rock, their loyalty for his father's power. Even in the Kingsguard, those brief shining years, he had tasted camaraderie. Esser Gerald, the White Bull, Hightower, Esser Barristan Selmy the Bold. And Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning. The man who knighted him. Brothers in oath, brothers in arms. Those days did not last. War came. Brothers died. One by one the white cloaks fell, and of the 7, only Jaime and Esser Barristan survived. And when Jaime slew the Mad King, to save 1,000,000 lives, to stop wildfire from devouring a city, the world refused to hear his reasons. Even Esser Barristan turned from him, calling him Kingslayer, before the court, severing the last bond they shared. Friend. Jaime Lannister had everything, but friendship had always been beyond his reach. Yet here, in a place reeking of blood and feces, a ragged, nameless doctor, this strange, unreadable Odin, looked at him without awe, without judgment. And asked to be his equal. How could something so ridiculous feel so sincere? / Odin, Jaime murmured, voice hoarse. He looked at the man, really looked, and something like warmth flickered in his exhausted eyes. Then, with a slow breath, he extended his remaining hand. Allow me to introduce myself properly, he said with quiet dignity. Esser Jaime Lannister. Not Kingslayer. Not Oathbreaker. Not Cripple. Just Jaime. And for once, that was enough. Chapter 18, No Friends. You may call me Odin, my friend. The farmer and the knight clasped hands. A gesture that bridged class, history, and bloodshed. For a brief moment, both men shared a weary smile. Until raised voices shattered the quiet. They turned simultaneously. Across the clearing, Brienne and Iggo stood locked in argument over a man collapsed at their feet, broad-shouldered, noseless, barely breathing. His chest rose and fell in shallow jerks, not dead, but close. I struck him first. Brienne's back was straight as an oak trunk, her voice firm and absolute. I broke his collarbone with the flat of my blade. He lost the strength to fight. Final claim belongs to me. Iggo folded his muscular arms, face expressionless. Wrong. Your strike made him stumble. I finished it. He tapped his own forehead, indicating the spot. A single blow with the pommel. He dropped like a butchered lamb. So, he is mine. Brienne's jaw tightened. I clearly remember landing the first decisive hit. Your memory fails, Iggo replied flatly. In the Dothraki Sea, women remember less than men. Sometimes they cannot even recall who lay with them the night before. Perhaps you should think harder. A vein pulsed in Brienne's temple. You crude Dothraki oaf, your brain is walnut-sized at best. Say it again. He is mine. The two circled the unconscious man like rival hounds quarreling over the same bone. Half comical, half terrifying. Odin and Jaime exchanged a look. In each other's eyes they saw the same thing. Resignation, amusement, and a dull headache forming. They moved forward as one. Iggo. Odin's voice wasn't loud, but Iggo stopped mid-retort as if someone had yanked on a chain. He stepped back at once, taking position half a step behind Odin, silent, waiting. Jaime placed a hand on Brienne's arm, only for her to jerk away as if burned. The knight's code is clear, she snapped. Right of finishing blow belongs to the first disabling strike. It should be mine. Jaime opened his mouth to reply. But Odin spoke first. He had meant to let her have the man, and the squabble cleanly. Until he saw whose face lay buried in the dirt. Recognition flickered in his eyes, sharp, intentional. This man, Odin said quietly, must come with me. He is useful, and in earlier matters, he served his purpose well. Jaime blinked in surprise, glancing down at the noseless man, Rorge. But the knight did not question it. He turned to Brienne, voice low. Let Odin take him, Brienne. He saved our lives. Brienne swung toward Jaime, breath catching, ready to argue, but her gaze fell on the ridiculous bow tied neatly around his bandaged stump. Words died in her throat. A beat of silence. Then she stepped back. Odin dipped his head in brief gratitude, then turned to Iggo. Carry him. Alive. We'll need him. Iggo nodded once. The matter was settled. And somewhere behind Odin's calm gaze, a deeper plan clicked into place. One that required a man with no nose. Still breathing. Iggo didn't argue. He hoisted Rorge's heavy body onto a horse as if tossing a grain sack, rough, efficient, final. Time to move. To cut through the lingering tension, Odin clapped his hands once, forcing a wry grin. We still need to get back to King's Landing, and claim that bathtub of gold dragons I'm owed. Jaime let out a short laugh. But it faded as quickly as it came. His gaze sharpened toward Odin. Tell me then, Odin. How do you plan to get me past the northern encirclement? We're stuck between Riverrun and Harrenhal, right under Roose Bolton's nose. And in front of us, thousands of northern soldiers. Odin drew breath to answer. But Brienne cut in first, stiff-backed and certain. I will take you to King's Landing, Kingslayer. If I must, I will cut a road through with my own sword. It is my duty. Her voice rang with blunt conviction, almost like she was announcing her rightful claim to Jaime himself. Odin only gave her a sidelong glance. One warrior against thousands of northerners. Admirable courage, my lady. Unfortunately, courage alone won't get us 5 leagues. He meant it as a caution. She heard it as a challenge. Brienne's jaw clenched. At least I can swear my life to his safety. I will not put my faith in some peasant who speaks only of profit and gold. At that, something cold flickered behind Odin's eyes. The woman had honor, no one could deny that. But gods, she was unyielding to the point of blindness. And what about you, Brienne of Tarth? He stepped forward, not cruel, but deliberate, stripping away the last of her armor of certainty. You swore to protect Renly Baratheon, and he died. You swore to Lady Catelyn Stark, to bring Jaime to King's Landing and trade him for her daughters, and where did that vow lead you? If not for this, profit-seeking peasant, as you call me, you and your sacred mission would already be trussed up like livestock and dragged to Harrenhal to warm Roose Bolton's purse. Your oaths, what guards them, Brienne? Your sword, or just your tongue? The color drained from her face. The words hit her where she was weakest, where she was most honest. Her hand flew to her sword hilt. You dare. Enough, Brienne. Jaime's voice cut through her fury like cold steel. He seized her wrist before the blade could clear its scabbard. To bear steel at the man who just saved our lives. Is that your knightly code? Brienne froze, breathing ragged, eyes bright with rage, hurt, shame. A perfect storm of emotion swirling in blue. Then she ripped free from Jaime's grasp, dropped heavily to the ground, and curled her arms around her knees like a furious, sulking child of 200 pounds of stubborn. She refused to meet anyone's gaze. Jaime exhaled through his nose, equal parts frustration and fondness, then looked back to Odin. Waiting. Odin didn't spare Brienne so much as a second glance. He wasn't petty enough to quarrel with a wounded pride. Instead, after Vargo Hoat captured you, he asked Jaime evenly, where was he planning to take you for ransom? Jaime blinked, then the realization struck. Harrenhal. The moment the name left his lips, Brienne shot upright like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. I knew it. You planned to sell us to Roose Bolton just like Hoat. You're no better than that butchering swine. Odin didn't even sigh. Arguing with a fool was harder work than arguing with a schemer. But he had long accepted the world had more of the former. Sit back down, my lady, he said quietly. If gold were my goal, delivering you safely to Tywin Lannister would fetch 10 times what Bolton or Robb Stark could pay. Brienne's lips parted. No words came out. Then why? She finally forced. Because we have no choice. Odin's tone was iron. To avoid Harrenhal, we must circle the God's Eye, adding 3 times the distance and 5 times the danger. And by the time we reached King's Landing, the war would be over. He let the silence settle like dust. Then he looked Brienne straight in the eye. Either you trust me, or you return to Riverrun alone and tell Lady Catelyn Stark how you lost her final bargaining chip. That broke her restraint. She surged to her feet, grabbed Jaime's wrist, and dragged with all her strength. Come with me, Kingslayer. This peasant is mad. He'll get us killed. But Jaime did not budge. She pulled harder. Nothing. Her eyes widened. Jaime's left hand, only one he had left, closed gently around her arm and patted once. His voice was soft but unshakable. I trust him, Brienne. He is my friend, just as you are. That struck her like lightning. For one heartbeat, her expression was raw, unbelieving, wounded, vulnerable. Then pride slammed down like a visor. She jerked her arm away, as though his touch burned. He is not my friend, Kingslayer. And neither are you. Chapter 19, The Dreadfort Lord's Dilemma. Harrenhal, the Kingspire Tower. The very name carried an ill omen, as though the charred wails of Black Heron and his son still clung to the stones. Their hatred forever woven into the mortar of this massive fortress built at the cost of the Riverland's lifeblood. Behind a desk of dark, lacquered oak sat Roose Bolton, lord of the Dreadfort. Its red sheen so deep it looked like old blood dried and polished. Smooth. Since the war began, this room had traded masters again and again. House Hoare had barely lifted a sword before Tywin Lannister swept them aside. And in the wake of that swift conquest, the Lion had briefly ruled from this chamber. The desk, worth a minor fortune, and the gilded candelabrum in the corner, its base carved in the likeness of a roaring lion, were remnants of that short reign. Now Roose Bolton presided here instead, and his presence added something new to Harrenhal's already suffocating gloom. A chill like the crypts beneath Winterfell, a silence like frozen breath. The room was immaculate, too immaculate. The kind of obsessive tidiness that made the skin crawl, much like the man himself. Behind that pale, veiled flesh, one could never glimpse the slightest flicker of true feeling. Roose Bolton moved with mechanical precision, like a device crafted of knives and gears. Incapable of warmth, incapable of error. The air tasted of old parchment and dried ink. Roose closed the book he had been reading. Its cover read plainly, "The Seven Kingdoms Most Cursed, Harrenhal and its Lords." The pages recorded, in great detail, every house that had claimed the castle since the conquest of Aegon I Targaryen. What astonished Roose most was not the list, but its brevity. Not even 3 centuries had passed, and 9 houses had already possessed Harrenhal. 9 houses, and save for the exiled remnants of House Hoare, none had come to a peaceful end. Every record seemed to confirm the same unsettling conclusion. Harrenhal was cursed. Legends claimed that Black Heron mixed mortal blood into the mortar to hasten the castle's construction, and thus the fortress was born tainted. A monument chained to misfortune. Some swore that on certain nights, the servants could still hear Heron and his sons screaming in the flames that consumed them. Roose Bolton let out a thin, humorless exhale. HMPH. His long, pale fingers brushed the polished surface of the desk. An absent gesture of disdain. The Dreadfort Lord did not believe in curses. The flayed skin banners of his house had seen to that. To Roose, such tales were nothing more than consolations for the weak and the vanquished. Stories told by men too afraid to face the truth of their own inadequacy. In his philosophy, the world was brutally simple. Strength rules. The weak are eaten. Survival is merit. Power is proof. Those who could not hold their lands, could not maintain their power, could not keep their own blood safe. They were not victims of ghosts or hexes. They were merely unworthy. The Boltons had survived in the unforgiving North for millennia, crossing blades with House Stark again and again, not through superstition, but through calculation, decisiveness, and ruthless patience. Not ghosts. Not gods. Never that. He tapped the desk once more before setting aside the parchment detailing grain consumption and supply routes. Even such a mundane gesture radiated an elegance that seemed out of place here in the rugged North. An elegance more often found in the drawing rooms of Highgarden or Aldtown. Yet now, upon that calm, unchanging face, a rare ripple disturbed the still waters. A faint furrowing of the brow, so small one could easily miss it, yet undeniably real. For the moment, affairs had indeed become troublesome. Roose leaned back in his chair, narrowing his pale eyes. A broad-shouldered figure surfaced in his thoughts. The young man adored as though he were the very incarnation of the old kings of winter. Robb Stark, king in the north. Even Roose Bolton, who placed cold logic above all, could not deny the boy's brilliance in war. Bold in his maneuvers, quick in his decisions. Since marching south, he had won battle after battle, so swiftly that, briefly, some believed the Baratheon crown itself might fall. But talent on the battlefield did not make one a statesman, for none could have predicted that the young wolf would tear apart his alliance with House Frey. Over a woman, an inconsequential girl at that. It was more than betrayal. It was political suicide, and militarily, strategically, the blunder bordered on catastrophic. House Frey held the twins, the most vital crossing of the Green Fork. Lose their support, and the North's supply lines and communications were strangled in an invisible chokehold. With one foolish act, Robb Stark had pushed a valuable ally into the arms of his enemies. A strategic cost far worse than a lost battle. Roose Bolton had tried time and again to discern what madness possessed the boy to orchestrate his own ruin. It was baffling. Now, with Moat Cailin held by Ironborn raiders, a poisoned nail driven into the only land route between north and south, the situation worsened. Had Robb kept the Freys on his side, the North might still have been supplied from the twins. But now, the North's armies, Bolton's included, were cut off entirely from home. They marched under foreign skies, crushing foes and burning towns, but without routes, without supply, without relief. A great army, victorious in every battle, yet slowly losing the war. It felt, Roose mused, as though they were trapped inside a finely crafted coffin, safe for now, but with the air growing thin. And then there was Catelyn Tully, whose judgment had been clouded by grief and motherly love. She had released Jaime Lannister, the most valuable prisoner in all 7 kingdoms, a bargaining chip that could have bent Tywin Lannister himself to the negotiating table. House Stark, Roose thought wryly, was nothing if not fertile soil for calamity. The thought of the Kingslayer made his brow throb. He closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. He had not ordered Vargo Hoat and his brave companions to hunt Jaime. But the sellsword had taken it upon himself to march out anyway. Without reports, without permission. Roose Bolton did not trust that greedy, treacherous SOC brute. Yet for the moment, he lacked the time to tighten the leash. Later, he promised himself. Once matters stabilize. He slid open a drawer, glancing briefly at the sealed envelope bearing the Crimson Lion stamped into the wax. As he pondered contingencies, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Brisk, armored, familiar. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. When at last he raised his eyes, the stony countenance of Steelshanks Walton stood in the doorway, mail shirt scarred by campaigns, greaves battered, gaze sharp. "My lord." The voice was low, efficient. Stripped of excess. "We've found the Kingslayer." "Oh." Roose Bolton's pale brows rose a fraction, surprise flickering behind expressionless eyes. His thin lips moved with dry irony. So Hoat finally proved himself useful. Walton stiffened. "And no, my lord. Not Hoat." The hardened soldier, normally so terse, seemed oddly unsettled. He struggled for words, as though unsure how to convey what he had seen. After a long, awkward moment, he swallowed and tried again. "Better you see it with your own eyes, my lord. They're waiting, at the gate." Chapter 20, Presence LV2. Roose Bolton did not step outside the castle. Instead, he received them in a small audience chamber within Harrenhal. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, its glow dancing across the faces gathered within. Shadows bending and stretching like silent phantoms. Seated at the head of the long table, Roose Bolton regarded the group before him. A collection so bizarre that even Steelshanks Walton's awkward report now made sense. His pale eyes swept over them one by one. First, a woman broader-shouldered and taller than most men, clad in battered armor stained by mud and blood. Strong as a draft horse, plain as a brick wall, and, unfortunately, flat as a board. Next to her sat Jaime Lannister. Once a golden knight of the Kingsguard, he now looked closer to a starving sellsword. Greasy strands of blonde hair clung to his temples, his once handsome face gaunt with exhaustion. His dominant right hand was gone, only bandages tied with an absurd little bow remained where his wrist should be. Still, he was alive, and for Roose Bolton, that was enough of a relief. Then, a dark-skinned Dothraki warrior stood watchful and silent, eyes never resting, even as he ate. Roose recognized him immediately as one of Vargo Hoat's men. But it was the fourth member who drew Bolton's gaze and held it. A ragged farmhand. Dirty clothes, dried blood, mud stains. Yet sitting with a composure wholly at odds with his appearance. He carried himself with unusual ease, not slouching, not tense, but relaxed, poised even, as though he were the only one in the room not out of place. It was that contradiction, that strange, quiet confidence, that put Roose Bolton on guard. A farmer should not sit like that. That air, deep, unreadable, watchful, reminded him of the first time he saw Tywin Lannister, all those years ago, marching under Robert Baratheon's banners. How peculiar. Roose's brow twitched by the slightest degree. Even the Seven could not explain how four such mismatched souls had come to travel together. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional crack of burning firewood. And another sound. A grating, insistent sound that scraped against the nerves like a dull blade. Scrrrr, scrrr, scrrr. Scrrrk, scrrrk. Jaime Lannister's left hand clenched a dinner knife with visible determination. He wrestled with a piece of roast beef on his plate, the meat stubbornly refusing to be cut. He tried again, and again. His jaw tightened, his face flushed with effort. Meat juices splattered onto the tablecloth. The screeching of metal on porcelain only grew louder. The atmosphere, so solemn a moment ago, now teetered dangerously close to farce. At last, enough. With a sigh of pure resignation, Brienne took pity. She planted her fork firmly into Jaime's plate, pinning the rebellious beef in place. Jaime paused, glanced at her, and spoke with icy politeness. His voice calm, yet pointedly enunciating three particular words. "Thank you, non-friend." Clearly, her earlier declaration of, "You are not my friend," had not gone unnoticed. Still, her help allowed him to finally cut the meat free. He lifted a small piece to his mouth, closed his eyes, and exhaled as flavor bloomed across his tongue. Tender meat, salt, black pepper, juices. After weeks of hardtack and salt pork, it was nothing short of heavenly. Roose Bolton watched him savor the food. And his confusion grew. This is not how a fugitive behaves, he thought. Nor how a hostage should. Finally, he spoke. // If I recall correctly, Sir Jaime. Roose said, voice as soft and cold as the Dreadfort's dungeons. We are, at least in principle, still enemies. Edmure Tully has offered a bounty of 1,000 gold dragons for your capture. His pale eyes narrowed slightly. Yet here you are, strolling into Harrenhal without disguise, dining at my table, eating my food. As if you were merely out for a countryside picnic. A breath of stillness filled the room. Do you not think, Bolton concluded dryly, that you are taking me a little too lightly? Hearing Bolton's reminder, Jaime did not respond at once. Instead, he hooked the entire slab of beef with his dinner knife and tore off a bite directly with his teeth. If Odin's plan failed, he reasoned, then he might as well eat his fill first. Before the noose tightened, only after chewing twice did he speak again, voice thick with meat and mockery. Planning to haul me back to Riverrun for that bounty, Lord Bolton. He swallowed, jabbed the air with his knife casually, and added. If you truly wished to cash me in, you could have ordered your guards to bind us the moment we entered. A beat. Besides, the reward is unlikely to be paid in full. He raised his right arm, or what remained of it, and waved the bandaged stump before Roose Bolton's expressionless face. As you can see, your hostage is incomplete. The words were both fact and probe. Jaime's posture loose, his voice relaxed, yet every heartbeat carefully measuring Bolton's reaction. For in the days before reaching Harrenhal, Odin had drilled certain truths into him. Remember this, Jaime. Roose Bolton is not a man of passion. He is a man of gain. The more he postures, the more he waits. Weighing value, calculating opportunity. What he wants from you is not what Stark can offer, but what your father might. And indeed, rather than angering Bolton, Jaime's insolence merely sharpened the man's gaze. Roose leaned forward, voice smooth as winter ice. Losing a hand seems not to have dulled your tongue, Sir Jaime. Perhaps I should remove the other. And send it to Robb Stark. A pause, cold, deliberate. I hear he would appreciate such a gift. After all, your nephew, or son, took his father's head. Even forewarned, rage flared bright and swift behind Jaime's eyes. His left hand tightened around the knife, then stabbed it upright into the table, point buried deep in polished oak. The hall fell still. Say one more word, Roose, he hissed. And I will cut out your tongue myself. Your sellswords, your bloody mummers, took my hand. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. When I returned to King's Landing, I could tell my father you ordered it. Roose Bolton gave a thin, colorless smile. A smile like frost forming on a corpse. And I could send your head ahead of you. And let you explain that to him. Steel rasped. At once swords, daggers, and tempers rose. Walton's hand gripped his hilt. Brienne's shoulders squared. And even the silent Dothraki tensed for blood. Just when it seemed the room would ignite. A voice, quiet yet weighted, cut cleanly through the tension. Forgive Sir Jaime's lack of restraint, Lord Bolton. One cannot demand composure from a man who has paid such a price. And lived. The voice rolled like slow thunder. Unhurried, deliberate, each word chosen with surgical precision. Roose's gaze snapped away from Jaime, toward the man who had spoken. Until now, Odin had sat silent, dabbed his mouth with linen, finished his meal without theatrics. Nothing about his ragged clothing suggested authority, yet something in his presence now demanded attention. Jaime exhaled, not relief, but recognition. He spoke lazily, as if suddenly weary of the entire exchange. Excuse me, I'm tired. Lord Bolton, if it pleases you, my advisor, Odin, will handle the remainder of these conversations. And with that, Jaime turned back to his plate, waging quiet war against the stubborn beef. Advisor. The word echoed through the chamber, absurd and impossible. Roose Bolton felt the corner of his lip twitch. Not amusement, but disbelief. A farmhand. The spokesman of House Lannister's heir. What madness. His pale eyes hardened, stripping Odin with a predator's scrutiny. Certain he would find nothing but fraud beneath the rags. But Odin had already shifted in his seat. He leaned back, slowly, as though sinking into the shadowed embrace of the high-backed chair. Firelight licked only his legs. His upper body vanished into darkness. Only his eyes remained illuminated. Two still pools of black that reflected flame, yet gave nothing back. And then, Roose Bolton felt it. A subtle pressure. A weight, not physical, but imposed. The presence of someone accustomed to command. The silent authority of a man who did not need to raise his voice. Bolton's breath caught, barely. Yet enough for his pupils to tighten. This is no farmer. This is a man who has stood in high halls, or should have. Across the table, unseen in shadow, Odin's lips curled, just slightly, exactly as intended. For days earlier, he had poured every coin scavenged from Vargo Hoat's camp into the system. And the system had granted him what he needed most. Open black lens bracket presence, LV.2 close black lens bracket. Authority is not spoken, it is recognized.